And I think okay, I think we have to say something about world events and what all this indicates. We have cautiously, I might say, spoken about a crisis of the regime, a crisis of the system of governance and rule. I use the word regime in its classic sense. It's a French word. It is a word that comes out of pretty much the Renaissance. It is used to talk about the totality of institutions and ideas and individuals who constitute the ruling class, or as we like to say, the ruling elite. The assumption is that even in what are known as democracies, at the end of the day, a society or a nation like ours is ruled by a group that's little more than 10 or 15% of the population. In the United States, the regime is populated or made up with a larger part of the population than perhaps you would find in England or Italy or even Russia. Perhaps China's ruling elite is closer to the size of what the United States is. A big part of explaining the size of the regime, the numbers of people that make it up, and I want to come back to explain why the numbers are important. A big part of what explains the size of the American ruling elite and why it has to be that size are the demands of empire. And as you know, we've spoken a lot about the sovereign debt, the debt of the federal government being at $37 trillion. And just parenthetically, I want to apologize for having constantly made a mistake saying the US GDP, or gross domestic product, is $23 trillion. I was about 3 or 4 years behind. It's close, as Shanta pointed out, to 27 trillion. 30 trillion, I'm sorry. The US economy produces in goods and services annually $30 trillion worth of goods and services. That is huge. By the way, I believe it is a suspect number because so much of what is counted as goods and services are financial transactions, trucks, stock traders, money managers, and that type of thing. So they're not producing anything, they're circulating already existing wealth and claiming it as new wealth. So the $30 trillion might not be accurate. And that is why a lot of people who measure the size and the comparative sizes of economies go to what we call PPP, purchasing power parity. In China or India, for example, or Russia, they do not experience the type of inflation that the United States experiences. So every year, things cost more than they did the year before. And if you count the higher prices as part of the gross domestic product, you're overstating the size of the economy. Because a lot of what we call GDP is just inflation. You didn't produce more milk or butter. The price, that much more milk and butter, it's just that the price of milk and butter went up. So that's why, again, many people go to this purchasing power parity, where economies and societies that are not inflationary, in fact, it's built into government policy to keep prices stable as part of the social contract with the population. In other words, for instance, in China, the Communist Party says that their goal is to end poverty and to raise the standard of living of the entire population, which means controlling inflation. Here, there is no social contract. So inflation becomes a way of adding to the, quote, profitability of corporations. That having been said, given the inflated nature of the measures of U.S. Economic growth, still, the sovereign debt is 1.25 times what the gross domestic product is. The debt of the government is growing faster than the economy. The interest on the debt, which is a devastating number for those who see American empire in terms of America's military might. The interest on the federal debt has surpassed what is expended annually on the military budget, a number which must constantly increase because of the demands of empire and the demands of an empire that increasingly defines itself in terms of its capacity to wage war. So when we talk about the sovereign debt, we're actually talking about the cost of empire. This begins to define the crisis that the Trump administration walks into and the crisis that they seek to resolve. Now, they won't do it. They will not do it. They cannot do it. The crises that the U.S. faces, that the regime faces, cannot be resolved on the same terms that created the crisis in the first place. So the idea of the Trump administration is this narrative that Biden and Obama did it wrong and I'm going to do it right. And by doing it right for him means imposing sanctions and tariffs on most of the nations of the world and then selling what we call wolf tickets to the world, that either you do like I say, or there's going to be a price to pay. Well, it's a rap song. I think it was by, I forget it, where they say, get down or lay down. That comes from the drug wars in cities like Philadelphia, where I don't go into all the details, but it might be helpful for y'all to know this in the event you get caught up. So, I remember when the Jamaicans descended on Philadelphia and with the claim that they were going to take over the drug trade, the crack trade in Philadelphia. And the junior black mafia, it's interesting, the junior, which means it was a senior black mafia. It's very interesting. It's the stuff of which comedic movies are made. But anyway, and so the junior black mafia said to the Jamaicans called themselves the shower posses, because they came with AK-47s, and they would shower their opposition with gunfire. So they were known as the shower posses. But then, it's a very interesting, the crime history of Philadelphia in recent years. But the Junior Black Mafia said to the Jamaican shower posses, either you're going to get down or lay down. They went home. And lay down meant you're going to be killed. So Trump is coming with a narrative of either you get down or lay down. And if you don't lay down, we're going to put all these tariffs on you and sanction you and so on. And just in the last couple of days, India pushed back for the first time, and it's literally breathtaking. I'm still trying to wrap my head around this sudden shift of India from the United States to a new alliance with China. So the get down and lay down didn't work. India neither got down nor laid down. And of course, he came to China with that rhetoric, and China didn't get down and lay down, and so on. So I bring that up as one of the indicators of a crisis of a regime, a crisis of an imperial regime that now must either retreat or to go forward will face a greater crisis existentially. In other words, and this is just my own almost visualization of what the situation could be. These are matters over which regimes go into existential crisis, where sides consolidate and go into what looks like an internal civil war for state control and state power. In other words, can the U.S. be an empire in a moment when humanity says in multiple ways, empires are finished? You will be the last Western empire to exist. And we increasingly reject your bullying, your threats, the idea that your economy must come before ours, that your farmers come before the Indian farmers, and you tell Modi to enforce austerity on Indian farmers, or to say to China, all that you have achieved in eradicating poverty, that must be undone in the name of U.S. hegemony? Well, I guess to a person that presents such a worldview to the world, you have to conclude that he is suffering from some level of mental illness, if not early stages of Alzheimer's. The perception is so out of sync with the reality of the world. However, it would seem that every empire, every hegemonic nation has gone through something similar, where the ruling elite becomes mad. The Greeks had a way of phrasing it. Those who the gods would destroy, they first make mad. And when you think about it, that is what the ruling elite looks like. And because we in free school have looked at ideologues and philosophers of the ruling elite like Peter Thiel, we spent a lot of time listening and thinking about him. The Israeli social science, I forget his name.
Yuval?
Yeah, Harari, yes. Kind of a futurist, predictor of the future. And of course, for Thiel and Harari, the future is always white. In a world that is not white. This has profound implications for the American people and for the question of whiteness. And is there a future for any people that identify themselves as white? I want to come back to that. But I wish to only say that we are looking at a regime crisis. Never in the history of the United States has there been such a crisis. And I want to underline this, a crisis that is existential in the sense of being a crisis of its very existence. Can that group, those institutions, those people, those universities, those corporations that have ruled America and dominated the world, are they now on the verge of collapse and existential decline? Is it just Trump? Or is it the ruling class? Or another way to put it, has Trump, with his recklessness in the name of saving American empire, accelerated processes leading to its collapse? You know, we have talked about an interregnum. I've thought about this a lot, and I think we are no longer in an interregnum. An interregnum, Cynthia, is a period between two major periods. In other words, a Italian political thinker talked about interregnums between a period, let us say, of imperial dominance, like the United States, the period of, quote, American greatness, unquote, and the period of a change. In between, there's what he called an interregnum. We have said that we have thought that maybe there were three possibilities in this interregnum: pre-revolution, pre-Civil War, and they need not be necessarily separated, but for the sake of argument, we will speak of them separately. Revolution means to change the system. Civil war means that the sides square off and fight each other. Or the third option was what Karl Marx talked about in the Communist Manifesto: ruin of all classes, the collapse of society itself. I think that these three possibilities can still be considered and should be. That doesn't mean that anything will go either way, but these are possible options from a historical standpoint. However, more than theorizing about these options, it is better to look at the empirical evidence, and it is abundant at this point. When I say the evidence is abundant, you know, in the first 6 months of the Trump administration, he was going, he thought, deal with the major and outstanding problems of the American social system, which are both domestic and international. He was going to attack the debt by cutting into government spending and by a regime of tariffs which would raise money on US imports. In other words, tariffs are a tax upon products, let us say, Indian agricultural products or Chinese iPhones or other things that come from other countries. So you put, let's say, a 35% tariff on that. Well, it's a tax on the products coming from these countries, which goes to the government and therefore theoretically helps to reduce the sovereign debt. But it's also a tax upon the people themselves. Now, Trump would say, well, we can balance it out by saying that we will lessen tariffs on India or China, these are major countries, or even European countries, by saying we will lessen the tariffs if you invest in production in the United States. So he thinks he's killing 2 and 3 birds with the same stone. But the fact of the matter is, he thinks that by forcing these countries to invest in the United States, that is a way of reindustrializing the US economy, okay? So one, he threatens them with tariffs, and he said, I'll lessen the tariffs on you if you invest in auto production, iPhone production, and other things in the United States, number one. And if you don't want to do that, I will benefit, the government will benefit from the tax on your product, which will go to lessening the debt, the sovereign debt. This, let me just underline, the question of the sovereign debt is not small. It is not a minor question, because debt that is increasing at this rate and is this large, never before seen in history, debt like this burdens the US economy, because resources that would be going theoretically to productive activity now has to go on paying the interest on the debt. Okay, but the question of the reindustrialization of the US economy, which means reversing 40 years of deindustrialization and a world trading and economic situation or regime based upon the US deindustrializing and buying cheap products from China, India, Vietnam, El Salvador, or wherever labor is cheap. This policy, at the end of 40, 45 years, has proven to have undone the American working class, hollowed out the US economy, and produced an angry, bitter working class who are poorer than they've ever been since the end of World War II for 80 years, who are looking at the fact that the American dream will not be for them or their children, the idea that every generation will do better than its parents, that the younger generation, no matter how much education they get, still can't buy a home, and on and on. And that ultimately it is affecting the white population. And so Trump, being, as I would call him, a populist, and I would put a white populist, he will make America white again. An America that did for white people and the white working class and middle class what no capitalist country had ever done for its population. He will restore that. Now, a lot of that is a dream. A lot of it is not a dream. It's real. So much so that social scientists and economists stop using the word working class and refer to the entire American population, including the working class, as a middle class, thus announcing that class as an identity and as a category of analysis was no longer applicable to the United States, which had produced a new type of economy, which was neither capitalist or socialist, but uniquely American. Well, as we have talked here, the devastation of the American working class was beyond anything imaginable. Towns, industrial cities and towns, for example, the Butler, Pennsylvanias of the world, the suburbs of Detroit producing automobiles, towns like Lordstown, Ohio, which was built around an auto plant, a huge auto plant. All of that was undone in a matter of a few years. And they said to the American working class, don't worry, we will get you jobs in data entry. The person said, well, what about my union? Don't worry about that. You in the middle class, you don't need a union. Person said, well, what about my health care? Don't worry about that. You ain't gonna need that because you ain't gonna live that long, no way. Or they said that the working class would ask questions that workers would ask. And they would say, well, if you can't get a job in data entry, become a security guard at University of Pennsylvania. And on and on and on, until the American working class, the downward cycle began to accelerate to the point at which it is today, where for at least half of the American people, life is a dark and tragic landscape. Now, of course, the whole dream, American dream, and all of the planning centralized white people. And this is a historic, well, I was going to say weakness, a historic and irreversible contradiction of American history. It centers, not as Marx would articulate it, upon the division of classes, but around the question, as Du Bois put it, of race and of black. That is why in every period after the Civil War of American economic development, there's been the need for millions of immigrants to be brought into the country. The 1880 to 1920 Eastern, Central, and Southern European immigration, 20 million people, who all became white. The current immigration from mainly Latin America, of people who, if they don't become fully white, at least won't be black. This is highly significant. It raises the civilizational, cultural, ideological question. Hence, the suffering will be disproportionately borne by black folks. In previous periods, in the period of slavery, in the period after Reconstruction, and in this period. And therefore, which I won't do, we have to study the social psychology of the Central American immigrants who come to the United States. By which I mean, and this is the critical question for the American people generally, how do you see black folks? That is the ideological question. Don't come here and act like you don't know. Because if you didn't know when you got here, you found out very quickly. And hence, even for immigrants in this period, not coming from Europe, but coming from South America, Central America, and from the Caribbean, including Black folk from the Caribbean and Africa. The question is not how you see yourself or where you're from, but how do you see Black people? And the way you see Black people and the necessity to see Black people in a certain way decides how you position yourself in American society and your relationship to white supremacy. Now, immigration is an attack upon the working class as a whole. After having destroyed unions, and by the way, the destruction of unions was participated in by union leaders. I often say this: to understand the American labor movement, you have to understand its ideological history. Most union leaders believe that you can be a leader of the working class and still be white supremacists. You know, I used to hear it a lot. Yeah, he's a racist, but he's good on the class question. He's good on the trade. He fights as a strong trade unionist, even though he's a racist. You'll hear that throughout the left. The idea that the working class could make a deal with the liberal part of the ruling class. In other words, we'll vote Democrat because we're allies with them, and they will look out for the working class. Well, we see how that went. So I just want to put those things on the table, but here we are. At the end, I would say, of an 80-year history. It's what the Russian theorists called a long wave. It's what we call a Kondrativ long wave analysis. A long wave in Kondrativ's analysis is 75 years. Well, we're looking at 80, but what does a few years here or there mean? But to understand where we are, we have to look at this situation from the standpoint of a long wave. And a long wave that is coming to an end. I don't want to be too certain about or absolute about this, but what this looks like more than not is a crisis of rule, a crisis of the regime, a crisis of the ruling elite. I think most of them, and you read the commentary in newspapers and in magazines where ruling class opinions are printed, they all acknowledge a crisis. Many of them, like David Brooks, who has become my favorite in terms of understanding the thinking of a certain part of the ruling elite these days. David Brooks sees this crisis and the fact that the ruling elite has no answers for it. He says, basically, there is no way out. Some, like Ross, do that, hedge a bit, but believes that the possibility for resolving this in such a way that the American ruling class can hold on to power both globally and domestically, the options are very few. And unless the ruling class acts decisively and quickly, the whole thing could be lost. people like Brooks and do that. And the reason I mention them, not because I agree with them, but because to understand the crisis, you have to understand how it is viewed by major thinkers of the ruling elite. Ross Douthat says that there's a small window of opportunity. Both of them acknowledge that this is not just Trump. There's something systemic about this, that there's no guarantee that a Harris presidency could have done anything much differently to stem the tide of crisis and so on. From the domestic point of view, and this is a fatal flaw in the thinking of the ruling elite. They think that if they can win the white working masses and middle class, if they can stabilize that relationship, if they can quiet them, if they can assuage their anger and anxiety, they will have gone away a distance towards resolving the crisis or giving themselves time to resolve the crisis. The fatal weakness is that white folk at the elite or the mass level do neither see nor understand Black folk and where Black people are at this moment in history. This is hugely important. And this is Trump. Can't see Black people, does not want to see Black people, because there's no way to resolve the crisis or square the circle if you throw Black people into the discourse. If it is just a white thing, you might be able to do it. Does that make sense? If it is white, because philosophically and ideologically, they're predisposed to think of the world as white. Let's not underestimate that. I was saying to Shantanu and Alice on our way over here, I said, when you all got to this country, when your parents got to this country, they assumed that they were coming to a white country. I said, part of the anxiety that you guys feel or felt, I don't think you feel it anymore, was that you were trying to fit a Chinese or an Indian person into a white thing. So you were always behaving to, one, repress who you thought you really were, who you really were, and seek white approval. That is that's the source of the anxieties and mental illnesses of elites from Asia. How to accommodate a white society or presumed white society when you're not white. Or the other question is, what is my pathway to becoming white? Which does such psychological and social damage to the person that it's unimaginable. And this is just parenthetic. Being in free school and being with you all the time and talking, I've begun to understand the crisis of the Asian immigrant. Mainly Asian immigrants are more towards the elite, high education, high overachievement academically, and that type of thing. But never happy, always unhappy. Well, the unhappiness is rooted in the effort to appease white people. I never look good enough because I don't look like a white person. This is a major problem. We had to resolve this in our relationship with white people. You see, every standard of cultural achievement is white. So you get a person from India, and there are many very, very dark Indians from India. But it is the lighter, the whiter, who is seen as the more worthy. One of the things you have to do, start talking like white people. You understand? Letting white people know that your values are mine. It looks good publicly, but then when you're in the interior moments, your interior life, you're being torn apart. Because how do you reconcile being white with what you came from? You didn't come from white, so how you white now? You know what I'm saying? But anyway, I won't go further to that. But I only bring this up to establish that a nation that defines itself as white, and America has never, ever defined itself as anything but white, although the greatest contributions to culture and civilization in this country have been almost exclusively Black. And I want to make that argument. The white world was exhausted after the end of the Second World War. They could do no more than they had already done. It was all the past. And even for this country, the future of this country would be carried on the shoulders of the African American people, not the white population, who had been quietized, who had been bought off, as Corpus said, definitely bought off. Keep your mouth shut, you can get ahead. Don't support Black civil rights, and you'll get ahead as white people. Everything associated to progress meant doing it for white people first. The white masses accepted this. I know so from my own experience. I was in the Communist Party, the best of white people, the best of the Jews were in the Communist Party. The best white people. And part of this had to do with the ideological framing of things, but they could not ever fully realize the future of this country was on the shoulders of Black people. There was always the hope, I shared, that white people would at some moment rise up and understand what Black people knew. It never happened. Never will. John said it never will. It never happened. And I'm talking about, I was with the best white people who had gone to federal penitentiary for their beliefs. White people that opposed nuclear weapons. Even white people like Henry Miller, who, when Du Bois didn't have a house to live in, gave him, Du Bois, his house in Brooklyn. This is the quality of white people I'm talking about. You know, most people will never have the opportunity to have those kind of encounters. But even then, there was a civilizational, I guess I would say, racial barrier to seeing Black men. Of course, they could see us as victims, and we are victimized by the system, but they could never see us as the principal agent of revolutionary change in the society. The majority of white Americans today would prefer that there be no progress if the progress was led by Black people, and they would have to share in the benefits of progress with Black people. They cannot see it. As they say, I'm gonna ride this white thing out and see where it takes me. And now we see where it has taken them. This problem, and this is why Du Bois is the central thinker of this stage, this modern moment of modernity, this epoch of modernity. He is the start of a new movement of world thought. He is that. He is the greatest philosopher of this epoch of modernity. He is the greatest thinker for the going forward at this moment in history. Out of Du Bois comes every movement in America worth attaching ourselves to, not to mention the great Martin Luther King. And, you know, in the post-World War II period, America gave the world Oppenheimer, the father of the atomic bomb. Black people gave the world Martin Luther King, the father of a new nation. This is real. And in the balance, when you balance it all out, as we can now do, it is Black people that define the future. And even in this difficult time for us, we still remain artistically, philosophically, politically, civilizationally, the most advanced group in this society, if not one of the most advanced groups on the planet Earth. I want to explain that. First, I just want to take up one other question, and that is the question of so-called genetic purity, white purity, and genetic mixture. Phenotypically, that is the way we look. Black people are the most phenotypically, which means genetically, diverse group in this society, maybe in the world. It was a forced march. We did not want to be bred. We did not want to be raped, but we were. And so infused into our blood is the blood of many European peoples. We didn't want to be bred on farms like animals, where Black men and women were forced to breed to produce new slaves. It was forced, it was rape, it was horrendous, a crime against humanity. But when Du Bois says the slave is everything African, he meant that its meaning is in so many ways. The blood of many groups in Africa were mixed in us. You know, let us keep it 100. African pre-colonial societies were based upon the village, the clan, the ethnic group. The gods of the Yorubas are not the gods of the Igbos. The gods of the Hutu are not the gods of the Tutsi, and on and on and on. So there was a kind of an inbreeding which produces a group of people that, I'm talking about tribal ones, that look alike, that think alike, that are related, not just culturally, but genetically. Okay? In the slave trade, and in plantation slavery, these separations were broken down. So genetically, the African American has much of the blood of most of Africa in us. Okay? But then this is infused with the blood of white people and the Native Americans. That's why I know it must be, confounding and shocking when y'all come from India, let us say, and you see a black person, let's say like Ike. You look at Ike, he could either be a darker skinned Italian or light skinned black person. You know what I'm saying? And I'm certain you've gotten confused. There are black people lighter than Ike or lighter than John. You see what I'm saying? But then you get black people, especially in the South, who are very dark, who seem to have never been genetically intermarried with anything but black people. You get pure black people, darker than many people in Africa. And we're all black Americans, suggesting a genetic diversity. Now, but white Americans pretty much look all the same. Think about it. One group is a kaleidoscope of many colors, many phenotypes. So, for instance, a lot of black men or women prefer lighter skin. A lot of lighter skinned black people prefer darker skin. You get a lot of light skinned women, you see them with the darkest brother. Isn't that true?
Yes.
Because tell the truth, right? As they say, tell the truth and shame the devil. Because you get really a lot of light-skinned black people who one time thought this was a privilege, come to the conclusion, I don't want my children to pass over into whiteness. You know what I'm saying? And so they will marry or have a child by a darker skinned black person. You know what I'm saying? A lot of people, I heard this when Jay-Z and Beyonce hooked up. They said, why would Beyonce hook up with that ugly nigga? They said that. Now, I don't know if he's ugly, but he looks more African than she does. And their children will be predisposed genetically and phenotypically, meaning the physical type, to look more African than white. Okay? And I don't have to love you to make that choice. This is a very important thing. You look at white people, it's no question, oh, that's a white person. You know a white person when you see a white person because they all look the same. But why do they all look the same? Because in the modern epoch, they privilege racial purity. It was not just Hitler who said, we're going to purify the blood of the German race. That was a general philosophy. In fact, it's very deeply rooted in German culture. The music of Richard Wagner, the great composer, is based upon tracing German history, German culture, the Germans, to a single genetic type, which must be preserved. The Jews were seen as Semites, mixed, therefore not pure. Okay? That's why the Jews are freer in the United States than they could ever be in Europe. We'll talk about that. The concept of racial purity is genetic suicide. Let me explain what I mean. The United States, and this really comes out of a lot of Du Bois' research. I hate to always be going back to him. See, the white man had come forward with the theory of what do they call social biology, that biology determined one's social position. In other words, white people were biologically superior to black people, hence they are more intelligent, they are more capable, they're more disciplined and everything. We black people were everything the opposite. We were lazy, we were dumb, we were everything, as they say, but a child of God. Okay, now they set it up. So that's what they call social biology. Herbert Spencer, the quote, great sociologist, who turned out didn't know his ass from a hole in the ground, but anyway, he was proclaimed to be great. His claim was a sociobiological claim. Du Bois said, let us deconstruct this whole thing of genes in society. I don't think he completed his work because genetic biology, had not advanced to where it is today, especially what we call population genetics. He began to argue, and this is a fact, it's a fact what he was arguing, that genetic diversity produces a stronger population than genetic purity. Okay, white people set up the system of exclusion and racial segregation. We call it segregation, far more than that. To protect white people, white women in the first place, from mixing biologically with black men. There was never an idea to protect black women from being raped by white men. But to pursue the presumption is that the rapist is always black and will demean the race by infusing their genes or combining their genes with a white person. The concept of racial purity is central to the concept of white supremacy. Does that make sense? You cannot pursue a policy and ideology of white supremacy without including the concept of racial purity. Who are the most capable white people? The most racially pure white people. Now, but then you look at black people. It's like a garden of diverse flowers. Now, they would always portray black people as ugly. Always. Except those who had signs of being racially mixed. That's why in Hollywood, early Hollywood, when they said, well, we're going to finally, after World War II, have a movie with a black star who's not a mammy or Aunt Jemima, well, you don't know those words, or buck or any of those demeaning stereotypes. The example would always be of a very light-skinned black person, like a Lena Horne, who comes from a Southern family of light-skinned black people who never identified as anything but black. Very interesting. But she was light-skinned. She could look white. She could pass. And pass. And so ultimately, that is what they preferred. And it caused certain devastation for us because it produced within the black community a color line within the color line, a color hierarchy, where, for example, the first black president of Lincoln University is a very light-skinned man, although a very black man in his values. The most educated tended to be the lighter skin. The most the working class, the proletariat, tended to be darker skinned, darker than the educated elite and middle class. They tended to be the most in prison. Go to any prison. It's predominantly dark-skinned black men. And it's always like that. A kind of color line within the color line, an imitation of the white bird. However, now, in the throes of this great crisis, white America, at the elite level in particular, is intellectually exhausted. Culturally, they're an absolute zero. It got so bad, that's why they had to import rockers like the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and the Doors and that from England to come over here. White people in England who were not inhibited to acknowledge that what I ain't doing nothing all that different than black music. So their music was superior to white music in the United States because it was mainly black music. And so white American, white elites could accept a Beatles or Rolling Stones, especially the Rolling Stones, sounding black rather than black people who not only sounded black, but were black. Now, where does this take us? We have looked now at an 80-year decline of a racially and genetically, quote unquote, pure group. They did not mix with black people. Part of the reason they said they didn't is because they said wrongly that it would lower the intellectual level of white people. Mix with black people, you're lowering the gene pool. The fact of the matter, had they mixed with black people, they would have their genes would have been better, but they wouldn't have been white no more. A child of a black and white person is black. Sometimes that child faces all kinds of contradictions. How do I be black? What kind of black person? Well, you black just like every other black person that was mixed with white people. We've been here before. It's no secret how we navigate this. You know what I'm saying? We know how it's done. It's not a secret. You just be black. Accept it. A lot of people try to say, well, I'm not black or white, but I'm mixed. Well, all black people are mixed for the most part. Look around this table, you know? However, the crisis of white people is a crisis of their own doing. You know how they say, you got this and you deserve it. Let's see how you're going to handle it. Now, black people, genetically diverse, phenotypically diverse, culturally, ideologically, in every way, it's now coming clear. Black people have surpassed the white masses. I'm sorry, repeat that with you. Black people have surpassed white people. Everything we were told in school, the way we were treated in school, the schools we were forced to go to in this city, presumed that black people were inferior. You need an all-black school because black kids are more violent than white kids and don't want to learn. So you have to build a northeast in the, quote, greater northeast that is white, so white people don't have to, touch black people and be influenced by black folk. It is just that brutal and ruthless. But it is their undoing. I just want to kind of, just to the lecture on Tuesday, because it was art and the black gods of the city. Okay, you know, how do I put this? Most white people think that's what are you talking about, black guy? What do you mean? You know, I'm of the opinion that a person like myself is normally dismissed by white folk, especially white elites. And I don't feel any way about it. It doesn't bother me. It's the story of all of our lives. But to say art and the black guys of this city, first of all, what do you mean by black guys? Isn't God white? It's the first assumption of most white people. Ike Miller is a pastor in the Episcopal Church. I think it's fair to say, y'all pray to a white God.
I thought, I think there's a division in the Episcopal.
Of course. Mm-hmm. But it is
accurate in terms of the majority, I can say.
Absolutely.
But I think there's always been a minority pockets where there's been a minority.
I would agree. That's always the case. Certainly Father Paul Washington and what became of the Church of the Advocate and how the diocese quickly undid that, is an indicate. Well, we could argue over the details, but the general picture is that the higher you go up the mainstream religion, the more white God becomes. What they call the main line, the Presbyterians, the Methodists, the Southern Baptists, all of them, God is white, unquestionably. So then what does it mean when black people say openly, and maybe not always so openly, the God we pray to is black? And when they say it openly, like in the case of Prophet Cherry or Elijah Muhammad, God is a black man and black people are divine. And the Jews are fake. I mean, they say it. But to openly discuss this in the context of what is a civilizational crisis of the white world and of white America is almost as bad as, the Salem, Massachusetts witches who were condemned and executed because they were talking about something other than the normal religious theology. Okay, and this is the last thing. If you want to see this as essentially an economic crisis, you're going to miss the boat. We're in the throes of what is a cultural and civilizational crisis. White people, as self-defined as white, have failed and will continue to fail in a world that is no longer white and doesn't want to be white and looks down with contempt upon white Americans across the board. If there's any sympathy for any Americans in the world today, it is for Black America. The world knows Muhammad Ali with affection. They know Donald Trump with contempt. They know Martin Luther King affectionately, admiringly. But they know George W. Bush or Barack Obama, a white man in disguise, with contempt. There are no better advocates of world peace than the Black spokespeople, who were prepared not just to protest for peace, but to die for peace, to die for it. I say this in listening to the Peter Thiels of the world. Well, we lost our energy in 1969, this is his narrative, with Woodstock and the moon shot, and we put a man on the moon. You know, as Gil Scott Heron said, Whitey's on the moon. But my sister still need some clothes. You know? Yeah. I said,
Rat on dead, my sister.
yeah, the rat, yeah. But Whitey's on the moon. Whitey's on the moon. But Thiel says that since we put Whitey on the moon, we ain't did nothing. And I say to him, you have not done anything. The world has moved forward. And more than not, Black people are positioned to move with the world. It makes no difference what white people think in these days. The white left, and we talk about this all the time, is a spent force. Any Black person that thinks that going towards the white left is going to open new vistas of ideas and knowledge to them, they were dumb to begin with, and they'll be dumber at the end of it. They have nothing to offer. Nothing to offer. First of all, because they begin at a cultural deficit. In other words, when I say a cultural deficit, what they see is not the world that must become, will become. They can't see it. They cannot hear it. They don't feel it. You can do all of your, Foucault and Lacan and Derrida and all these people from France. They in France, hometown. The only thing they got in common with here is that they're white. But you'd rather listen to a French academic that don't know his hand from a hole in the ground than Du Bois. So you get a white man from France who don't know what he talking about and can't nobody understand what they writing to begin with, and make him an avatar of truth, beauty, and freedom. That's how desperate you are. Black folk are stood for hope of making a new nation. We have invested in this country more than white people have. They are lazy, trifling, selfish, without character. Let's keep it 100. They have no gods. By gods, I'm talking about representatives of truth and beauty and freedom. They don't have that. Everything defaults to the individual. And suppose the individual don't have the resources intellectually or culturally. And then you aggregate, count up all the white people who defaulted to individuals. You get people who do not know how to build societies, who do not know how to cooperate, where everything is a zero-sum game. Either it's me or you. And then you add to that the genetic, the genetic deficits. They have not mixed with the rest of humanity. They have not become stronger. They have not learned from other people because they felt they had nothing to learn and everything to teach. Their religion is a farce and a fraud. Their gods are dead. They announce that. And I want to just say this. When we came out of South Carolina, my family came out of South Carolina, other people came out of Alabama. What was the first thing they did? find God. And man, Fawcett is so beautiful, that little book, Black Gods of the Metropolis. You find the black gods in Philadelphia, you find black people. And I'm not talking, excuse me, I'm not talking about going to no Presbyterian church or Episcopal. I'm talking about going to one of them churches where they speak in tongue, where they have an alternative theology. I'm talking about a prophet cherry. The white man is the devil and hated by God. And I know it's the truth because I'm a Jew. And the Jews said, no, you're not. He said, well, I don't recognize y'all as Jews. So let's keep it 100. That's a bold move in the name of seeking gods of your people. Does it make sense how God is such an integral part of every civilization? Yes. If you don't have God, you don't have civilization. Contrary to Marx's claim that religion is an opiate. No, religion is a collective identity. It is a marker of civilization, of collective philosophy. And you know, when they got here to Philadelphia, to Chicago, to Cleveland, we didn't know where we was coming to. Wasn't no welcome mat put out. You understand? Germans came, well, here's the German society. We're going to help you get a job. You know, here come the Italian. Here's the, you know, in South Philly, we got the, what they call this, the thing they got for the Italians, the Christopher Columbus Club or something, you know. Say, yeah, I forget the fraternal organization of Italians. Not the mafia. I'm not talking about the mummies. No, okay. But, that's a fraternal organization too. But they had welcoming committees. And then, of course, the ultimate welcome, we welcome you to the white race. We welcome you to white race. Black, and so at the end it was 20 million of them that came from Europe. Only 1.5 million of us by 1930 had come from the South. We didn't know where we could live. We didn't know where we could work. You understand? We knew we would have to do the dirtiest, heaviest, hardest, most dangerous. Knew it. And I'm not telling you something I read in no book. I saw my grandmother's brothers. I know this. I saw how black men and women had to work just to get a little bit ahead. And how I heard stories coming up in my neighborhood. This was after World War II. One brother said to me, yeah, I don't know what he said it to me, it was saying it talking in the community. He said, yeah, I just lost my job. They laid me off because they said a cat came from Ukraine and they had to give him my job because it'd be easier for me to get another one. I remember that, so as a little boy. I mean, by the way, you know, a lot of times when you hear, these are narratives, this ain't nothing I made up or heard, or no scholarly works and all that shit. I heard this myself. I had to give up my job to Ukrainian. Not that I did anything wrong. In Reading Terminal, at the Oyster Bar down there, my friends worked there. One of my friends, his name was Rob. He had worked there in Reading Terminal since he was a teenager. He's from Richard Allen Projects. Beautiful man. He was the cook. Suddenly, a few years ago, they fired all the black people and hired Central American immigrants. Robert, who had worked there literally all of his work life since being a teenager, over 40 some years, then had to look for a job. He ended up as a security guard and a year or so later died of a heart attack and high blood pressure. So I'm thinking that I heard this story before, I've seen this before. The owners of the place, no gratitude for the, because Reading Terminal was one time at a very low point, but these black workers, and Robert in particular, stayed there with them. You fire him. And then it's not just that you fire him, but then you bring in Latin American immigrants. You don't think we see that? And you don't think this is repeated in Chicago and other cities? Los Angeles. See, this is why, you remember the lady was here when I criticized sanctuary cities? Well, what about a sanctuary for all these poor black people? Well, y'all been here for a long time, so y'all know how to deal with poverty. That's what they would always, some kind of nickel and dime espionage like that. We know it. But yet, there is no music but black music. James Taylor, I love his music. Michael McDonald, beautiful imitation of black singer. By the way, he doesn't talk the way he sings. When he talks like a white man. When he sings like a black man. That's a really interesting double consciousness. But anyway, at any rate, there is no music but black music. There is no music. There is no art but black art. Andy Warhol, in the late part of the 20th century, said, well, commercial art is art. And he therefore made, as a work of art, the Campbell soup can. Now, there's nothing wrong with that if that's where you want to go. But what about Jacob Lawrence immigration series? What about Romare Bearden? What about Elizabeth Catlett? The vast body of work of Elizabeth Catlett. Are you going to reduce this, that art is a soup can, a Campbell soup can? That commercial art is art itself? That's why over at the library, I tried to say that the artist represents a search for black gods, for black ideals, for black striving. You don't have anything to strive for. You don't have gods that a Campbell soup will do. Campbell soup can will do. It is a diminishment of humanity itself, and hence it makes all the sense in the world when they go to the transhuman thing. Why is everything transhuman, transgender, trans this and the other? Because they have given up on the human. Black folk have not. A people who produce art have not given up on humanity. A people who can't produce art have said they're not a part of humanity. This is the last thing I would say. I know one thing I said, I was trying to do a reinterpretation of Du Bois's Dark Princess. And in free school, we have read that novel, I don't know how many times. And Magna has almost memorized the whole novel. And it has meant so much to the entire free school over the years of the free school with all of the changes that we've gone through. But to me, it then last Tuesday, it took on added significance, especially, first of all, the way it is set up. Prince Catelia she's the princess of a part of India, fictionalized. And she, for Cynthia and others who haven't read it, there is this council of freedom fighters who are meeting in Europe. And they're trying to map out how to pursue the anti-colonial struggle against the white world. And they meet. And in this meeting, and Matthew, the Black protagonist, leaves the United States when they discriminate against him in medical school. He wants to be a gynecologist, and they say to him, "We're not going to let you operate on no white woman's private parts. Are you crazy?" That's the white. And Du Bois, of course, showing the complete absurdity of it all. So he throws in the towel. He's from Virginia. Probably his parents or grandparents have been slaves or the result of the defeat of Reconstruction. He leaves the country, finds himself in Europe, and this princess is also in Europe because she's looking for a worldwide movement against white colonialism. And so a white American disrespects her in this cafe, and Matthew stands up in her defense. And she invites Matthew to this meeting. And he goes there, and the Japanese and the others, they question, well, what do Black people have to do with this? And are Black people intelligent enough to be a part of a world movement? And Matthew doesn't have a direct answer, but he begins to sing a Negro spiritual. I don't quite remember what it was. Go down Moses, go down Moses. Yes, go down Moses. And somehow Catilia wants to hear his story because she, young and brilliant and dedicated, wants to know the answer. Do Black people have the capacity to be a part of a world movement? She is so consumed by this question of Blackness and Black America that she says, I will do my own personal study. I will go to America. I will live with the poorest of the poor of the working class and work in factories. She comes to America. And at this time, Matthew is going through certain iterations of his life, including marrying a Chicago politician, a brilliant Black woman who was a complete opportunist, and certain things. But anyway, Matthew and the princess reconnect. And it is at a time when Matthew, who had come back to the United States, was working on the railroad, working in factories and shit. And he was apparently at a low point in his life. They hook up intellectually, politically, and then personally. She ends up becoming pregnant with their child by Matthew. But she goes to Virginia, where Matthew is from and where his mother lives. And apparently his mother's a very dark woman. And she goes there to have the baby. And when the baby is born, Matthew comes to assist. When the baby is born, this princess says to Matthew, Matthew, your mother is Kali. Kali is one of the principal gods of the Hindu religion, a female god, you know. Your mother, your Black mother is Kali. Now, what is the revelation? The The revelation is that I have discovered God in your Black mother. That, and this is the way I interpret it, because in the ancient world, there is no such thing as blackness or whiteness. It is only a modern invention. But Kautilya is modern. The freeing of India is as Gandhi showed, is the freeing of Hinduism from old and probably incorrect interpretations of the Gitas, Bhagavad Gitas. That for India to be free, Hinduism had to be free. But in this novel, Your Mother is Kali, I interpreted Kautilya as saying, I have found God and she is Black. Okay. I don't want to say too much.
Go ahead,
That could be wrong.
You on the track.
Yeah.
You on the track.
Okay. Du Bois was saying that the world, the modern world, must find God and must find her as Black. There's a way to think about this crisis, especially in its American manifestation, but probably in its whole Western civilizational manifestation, as the failure to acknowledge what Kautilya said, your mother is Kali. Or to say what Minister Ishmael said when we interviewed him. Yes, God is Black and Black people are divine. Politically, culturally, aesthetically, artistically, the meaning of this weighs heavy upon the American crisis. It is not only a political crisis because white people can get angry. They can create a MAGA movement, a Tea Party, but they never seem to go that far. They stay angry until they're not angry anymore. Probably get on dope. You understand what I'm saying? But they're angry and that's it. They don't produce a Martin Luther King. They don't produce a James Lawson, a Diane Nat. They never produce that. And so I interpreted this, or tried to interpret it at the library. As because I quoted the first African Pope, Augustine of Hippo, who said, man is made for God and will not find peace until he finds it. And I said that Black men are made for Black gods and will not find peace until they find him. I would extend that. White people are made for Black gods and will not find peace until they discover that. Where do they go? What do they have? What do they have? With all of our problems, We are so far ahead of that. The history of our consciousness in this country cannot be replicated by white people. Their history of consciousness literally goes nowhere. Just keep it as it is. Don't rock the boat. Let's keep white people on top. All of us, we're going to stay together. You know, we white. You know, we in this, you know, even though I'm doing bad, I'm going to ride this white thing out, see where it takes me. Check it out. Go around it. On your jobs in school. They don't never want to do, frankly, they don't never want, you know, black person come and change the discussion. Let's talk about the Eagles. You know, before you came and they was talking about everything. Trump, this, that. As soon as a black person walk in, oh, let's talk about Embiid of the 76. I don't care about no Embiid. Let's talk about the Eagles. You know, oh, did you hear? No, see, as soon as the black person comes, then we got to get the trivialization of discourse. You know what I'm saying? Does that make sense? But, okay, I'll talk too much. But I say all of this to say we have to understand the nature of this crisis in different ways. It is not, first of all, it's not the way white people generally want to present it. Oh, we can solve this. Oh, we have the capacity to do this. No, you don't. Oh, we can, and then it's just, I want to make this so perfectly clear. When white people talk seriously among white people, black people, not even a distant memory. We are not in the discussion. Although the creative force of the society are black people. There isn't. And music is not a small part of this. Art is not a small part of this. Philosophically, we have surpassed them. So what do, white people? Oh, Trump? Oh, well, now we don't want Trump. Now we're going to go back to normal white power. No, it's over. You have to rethink the civilizational foundations of what you call your nation, because this nation is not a nation and will never be a nation until it is reconstituted on the foundation of the black struggle for freedom. Go ahead. Speak up here.
Tony, if I can say about,
Speak up a little bit.
if I can see the contribution of art coming from our culture, it's in sports. If you look at black basketball, look at Kyrie. Nobody's ever seen anybody dribble basketball. Look at Michael Jordan. Look at our artists is in sports. If you look at it, that's what we should be athletes. They've never seen anybody do what we can do physically. That's an expression of us. I play a lot of sports. So when we play basketball, you can see guys in moves that nobody can do. That's what they don't want to look for. What they want. Because nobody saw anybody dribble. Remember all those fouls?
Yeah.
Nobody could dribble like the play they did. Wouldn't be moved. They talk about Michael Jordan, that he went to the air, he was like in air. Same thing with Dr. J. And I'm not trying to be prejudiced about it. But one of the things that makes us great athletes, those who play athletics, look at football play. Look at O.J. Simpson. Look at Jim Brown. The way they moved on the field. It was like poetry. It was like a cheat. They never seen anything like that. And he even said to the army to the box. That was poetry. It was poetry. Look at Sugar Ray Robinson, the greatest fighter ever. He would throw 50 punches. It was like big, clumsy, lumbering punches. So we express ourselves in sports. Please, we express ourselves artistically in everything we do. Whatever we do, our soul in. And I can say as a sport person, I've never seen anybody have the athleticism. Look at what that black girl did to the gymnastics.
Yeah.
What's her name? She won 7 gold medals for black. What's her name?
Simone Biles.
They said she's done things that humanly defy the imagination. Well, look at it. They've never seen anybody do the flips, the moves. There was a black gymnast, she was from France, and she did a move where she went backwards, and they said that was illegal. You can't do that in competition. You're not supposed to do that or backwards. She was African. I just wanted to express that because that's one of the reasons I love sports, because sports is the only area that we have been completely allowed to express ourselves. Let me tell you what. The black people go to the end zone and dance. Remember the down? When we score touchdowns, the black people play from the end zone and do these moves and dances, and they have to. You see, you can't do that in the end zone. Now, and with the fans, so it's you can do it.
Can I just add just one other thing? You know, I was growing up, I was part of drum and bugle corps. I was part of the drum line. Yeah. Yeah.
That's a medicine.
Yeah. So I'm always interested in, on YouTube, they have a lot of historically black colleges, their marching bands, especially from the South. Yeah. And now they have become, they have started to invite these black college marching bands to the Rose Bowl parades. And this is an illustrious parade, whereas before there would only be, you know, the University of Ohio, white colleges. And I looked at these kids, literally, kids, 75 or 100 of them, marching and playing music. You know, Earth, Wind and Fire, Luther Fan, all of these. And I'm saying to myself, the discipline, order, creativity is something to behold. And frankly, you know, there's always this argument or this thing put forth. The reason we went to turntables and that type of thing is because they took music out of the schools. Well, how do you explain Jackson State University in Mississippi coming out with this band and the drum man? It's just, it's not just define what is physical, it's define the imaginary. That's why we talk about a black proletariat imaginary, an anchor, an aesthetic anchor for all of this society and maybe for the world. And I agree with you. Michael Jordan, all of these athletes, but there has never been a Muhammad Ali. A great athlete, but a greater human being. How do you explain it? If you're superior, show me your Muhammad Ali. You don't have one. Oppenheimer, the father of the atomic bomb. Martin Luther King, the father of a new nation. If you want parentage, which one would you choose, my brother? The argument must be aggressively put that the crisis of white America is a white crisis produced by white people, and the resolution to the contradiction is right in front of your stinking dumb eyes. It's right there. This people, through struggle, this is produced through struggle. Yeah, the genetic predisposition, we're genetically stronger than them. We don't age like they do. I'm gonna tell you the truth, we don't. Well, I could say that in my own way. You're nothing, brother, but I won't get into that. We don't. But that's genes. But more than genes is culture and struggle. Struggle. when they said we were ugly, when they said we were ugly, and they said it over. Y'all will never understand what they did. It is criminal. When you say that an entire people are physically ugly, a child would look in the mirror and say, I'm not pretty, I'm ugly. We had to overcome that. We had to overcome it. And it was a political struggle. And white people who struggle for nothing, don't know how to struggle, will have to be taken by the hand of black people. Now, you lost and turned out. You got distracted on the way to grandmother's house. You effed up. You turned out. And I say this by studying their intellectuals. It's nothing. Go to their great universities. Zero. Nothing. Martin Luther King was right. I think I'm integrating my people into a burning house. And he was right. Go ahead.
I'm just coming back to what you talked about, because today was like, my God, when you confirm something, and I'm sitting with you, because I said he took a deep dive, not just because this book was your whole present and experience to still be here. And I'm thinking about the Bois Dark Princess, because I gotta meditate with this. So you're not just opening up the book like saying it's Matthew. He's really, to me, it's like he imprinted the book of Matthew. The book of Matthew and the Bible.
Yes, sir.
And to me, he invoked in the Bible, because he said Matthew's, but it gives Matthew name. It's like a consonants with Catulia, because he got to use something with the spirituality. Like my spirituality has presence, and he's invoking the presence of not just the black person. He has encountered, but he really has Krishna, because he has went in the well, like you go in the water well, he has went down inside the well to bring something up for our people, so we don't die from thirst. Like we could die of thirst, and we really, we really have a divine thing now. Well, persons don't want to read the book of Matthew. To me, that's like a challenge of not your intellect. This is a spiritual dimension of the embodiment of the book, all of the New Testament. A person don't want that testament. Well, read Paul too, because I'm making an announcement, because you just hammer this thing. You just been hammering. I'm like, let me just put my little tap on it. You hammered it today.
Can I ask you a question? Why do you think he uses Matthew in the book of Matthew?
Because I guess sitting with my grandparents, sitting with my dad, and I always, he'd be doing something like they playing king checkers. He said, you got a book of Matthew. Just like something that you say, but not saying he never went to church. I'm just saying what he would say, and he would say, by Matthew. And then you just don't hear that name unless it has, to me, it's a sacred meaning for me. Whether how we use Jeremiah, and when I hear his name, it's almost like I'm hearing like Isis and tambourine in the church all the time. But I can kind of hear it like that. And for me, to me, you making a person confront the embodiment of the spirituality. Or when I went to church, holiness churches and real sacred places that we had to go to stay alive, not just staying in the bread line. We was in the church line too, because we really need to have this. We need to have this testament. For me, it's like, and the company that you keep too is a testament. Because I know that.
Could you say, what is it? Is there anything special about Matthew in the book of Matthew? Would you say something?
I feel like I feel like it might be because one of the associations is like.
Say that again.
I'll be honest with you, I can't tell you anything off the top of my head about the book of Matthew, except for the fact that Matthew is, in a sense, more theologically and systematically oriented than the other gospels. The other point to make about Matthew is that much of Matthew is based on what's written in the Gospel of Mark, the chronology and things like that. Pretty much, it's pretty clear it comes out of Mark. And then Matthew picks it up on the one hand, and Luke picks it up on the other. But Matthew is, in a sense, kind of like more doctrinally oriented, but important to take.
Well, I wonder if it's the Testament.
I'm saying it because I wouldn't take the Bois using the name for an empty shell, like you write a book and got shell for the cover. I completely acknowledge it once I start reading I completely acknowledged it once I started reading the Dark Princes, because our Bible school student from like childhood, I don't, this is just part of how you carry your life, like that. But for him to put the divine in that, to make things have a divine presence, well, people don't want to acknowledge that, But Cotillia, for me, Cotillia in Ahsoka, Cotillia is mentioned. She's like, that's like the statesman, the statecraft in kingship. Cotillia is like the military manual, but it's the statecraft in kingship. So I don't, because sometimes her name is, Cotillia's name is cloaked in the book, like Matthew is cloaked in the book. But in Cotillia, I've been journeying with Ahsoka and called the lost, it's like the lost folklore, or it's things about the prophecy of the dirt, like something ain't dirt, something that you bring, something that you bring to the divine, and all I could do is, all you can do is bring dirt, and that's the thing that we arrive out of what we are. We're our ingredients of what we are as human beings connected to everything. So I'm not saying it's regular. It's like dust. It's like the dust of stars or dust or something like that. But Dark Princess for me is like that. She's dark. He ain't say black, but she's still black. She's dark. She's still black, like the Black Madonna. It's still something. It's still some divine thing that we're not using it like to oppose each other. Kind of like supplementing life.
Yes, yeah.
You know what I mean? Like you got this book right here. I'm like, oh my God, you got the a metropolis is like Philadelphia when a person first came, even though they had been here before. When my family been in the 1900s, but even though I was born in 52, they already had been here. I was going everywhere I went. We all over the place. East Coast, all up to Kansas, Hudson River, Delaware, all those trails and like that. I'm here on South Face. This is Catherine Street. This is the Bois. He made like to me he made a diameter. He diametered this place here. He ain't just got the Philadelphia Negro. He made a diameter to connect Philadelphia young people in our culture. I don't care
A different geography of the country through the vision of Black people and experience. It shifts the geography.
And we confirm about being in this church right here, the Confirmation Church. If we were in this church right here, we go like be in class, or we was in theological school. This would be the theological class of students that like all the different people that, for me to quote out the Bible, I can't quote everybody, but we would be like those brethren and sisters. We don't know where you've been divinely vocated to some place that you got to come unknown. It's unknown to us. We would be here 20 years ago. Unknown to us 50. I got born 52. Unknown to that the circumstances like get up. And to me, I had to get up this morning because it was like goodwill. I went to class and said, well, I went to school at the Goodwill. I went to vocational school at the Goodwill where you go to learn about self. I went there for class. My mom said, I'm going to the Goodwill, Allegheny, going to place. Oh, okay. Just because I'm saying this is my day was like, when I woke up, I said, this is good. It's like having the best part of your will, that you got to get up with your will in the morning and be willful. Make your, it's not like surrender to just anything. It's totally the doctrine. It's something that you hammer out so that I don't have to, I'm not saying I don't accept it. He's making it like the Bible will say, this is plain sense. You know, plain, like the plane of sense, like PLAND, that kind of plain sense. And so you can't joke with this around because it's foundational, even with the way this building looks in the inside. You can take a picture of this building from an observation like this, and you will have what we talking about in what I call temple, like in the temple. It's like a temple. If I took a shot of this silk and I dimension, I make dimensions of it with the pillars, this would be like our conversation, and somebody architecturally put it, you know, like the everything, like architectural music. And I ain't gonna have to repeat that because this is what I learned coming to the free school so that I could keep things elevated from my own person and don't make yourself feel like you just went on above everybody. You know, to make that plain sense. If we move that way, we're gonna move like that. If we turn on a plane, we should be able to turn together. We don't want no plane. We don't want to be dynamic, like you said. Like we just ain't playing that. We playing difficult basketball. It's dynamic, but it's difficult for us to throw the ball in the hoop. But it ain't because we using because this is the kind of thing that the Bois was drawing diagrams for everything. He had diagrams for everything. You think we sit around playing around everybody? He got intricate diagrams, and I'm gonna say one more thing. I always looked at the Bois as being the physicist that I could approach because I studied Oppenheimer too, but everybody don't have a chance to grow up and assemble things as they grow until they develop. I started very young, but since I started very young, I can create that kind of wavelength language. I can create the wavelength writing principles, you know, like that. So that ain't far from me. But I still understand shit. The Bois is because he over there in Zurich, in Germany, conversing with physicist students who understand the physicists of speaking to each other. And now I don't know, you don't know. You know, how you gonna know what I'm talking about? I gotta have 10 black boys in here and set them all up and show you my spatial arrangement. But the person said,
what kind of arrangement?
A spatial arrangement. But if white people gonna say, I can't know because you gonna say you'll be up there. I be saying, yes, dude. I be saying, yes, dude. You know, but it's being demonstrated as Tony is talking. He got all the literature that can base something like Black Strategies, like that brother that wrote Black Strategies, that you could try to get somebody to carry the ball, because we still need that kind of, you know, he's not one dimensional. And that if something was going to be called the Dark Princess, it would be like our cloak in this country. Like the Dark Princess for me is like the cloak, like you can't see the inside. But for me, it's like you got people that's got the cloak, and for me, sometimes the cloak got to come up a little bit at a time. People don't want to believe. Tony just gave everybody like a shout match, a shouting, like we said, a shout for the church. Shit, yeah, like that. I'll be like, you know what I mean? Yeah, and that's like to me, we don't want to say. To me, that's like the anointment. Like if I was sitting with Farrakhan, I could be sitting anybody I want to, but I know it ain't 50 miles from what I'm thinking about. You know, it ain't like that because I understand we grew up in the same kind of thing with your family, with your mother and father, like my mother and father. They go, this is South Carolina, North Carolina. This is real. This is a real record. This is a confirmed record.
Let me let Jeremiah
I just wanted to.
and then Kathy, then
I just wanted to add to Derek's interpretation of the usage of Matthew
Yes.
in Dark Princess, but this may be too literal of an interpretation, but just because Derek put it on the table, one other way of thinking about it would be that, you know, Matthew is famously the first book in the New Testament, and in that sense, it literally marks kind of the new dispensation, you know, the arrival of Christ, and so much of the arc of the story in Dark Princess is about the birth of a child. And actually in a way that's kind of similar to, it reminds me of If Beale Street Can Talk by Baldwin. But I don't know, maybe one way of interpreting it is that Matthew represents, like, it kind of signifies or invokes the book of Matthew as like the start of a new deliverance, the start of a new kind of salvation for the world. But I don't know, I just wanted to add that. And then also to what Derek brought out, I don't know if you were talking about like a painting or something, but it reminded me of, there's like a whole, this isn't the last thing, but there's like a whole genre of, you know, kind of European Renaissance painting, which is like ceiling work, you know, and so there's very famously like Michelangelo's Chapel, but like basically throughout all the cathedrals that you go to in Europe, they all have like artwork on the ceilings, and I think in one sense it's very positive because it gives you a sense of like awe, it kind of inspires a sense of awe, but I think the kind of other side of it, at least from my interpretation, is that it's also a way of kind of like imposing on you a sense of authority and a sense of like, I don't know. So I don't know, it's complicated, but I don't know. I just feel like it's interesting to go from that idea of like art, which is yes on the ceiling, but it's also designed to kind of like impose on you a sense of authority, to the kind of mural work that becomes much more common in like black art, for example, but also even like the Mexican muralists, and in which you can have a much more actually relationship with the kind of characters who are portrayed in like kind of still on an epic scale, with mural work. I don't know, I just wanted to bring that up as kind of interesting development of consciousness, and even like what the art and how it affects a human being, how that changes with the kind of development from European civilization to Afro-American.
Yeah. I guess just to build really quickly on that, I guess I hadn't been thinking about it, but it's not just cathedrals that use that, but also European palaces like Versailles, all the, like basically they took a lot of those cathedral-like concepts and they started painting like ceilings where it's like, you know, their representations of angels or authority figures are literally like in chariots in the clouds in the sky, and they look down on you as you're a visitor in the palace, and you might still be visiting in like the 21st century, but you still have to look up at something, and it is like kind of a weird thing to be like, they really see themselves in that position versus what you're saying. Like, but I was actually going to say in response to what you brought up today, and also actually having had some time to digest your lecture from Tuesday, which there was so much to digest, there was so much to reflect on, that I really appreciated what you brought up today about, and I want to think more about it because I'm trying to grasp it myself, which is what struck me is like not just your like the depth of the crisis that we find ourselves in, but also when you said basically that we're no longer in an interregnum, which I think is something kind of different than how we were talking about this moment a year ago or so. We were going back to Gramsci's like interregnum, and I kind of want to think more about what that means, because I feel like we are, what you were saying from last week's free school about being in an irreversible state of collapse of empire, and the signs of it are just so everywhere, and yet like where really is like the way forward when so many like white ideologues and like seem to be unable to think through or think past, or like they too have like reached a certain point of exhaustion, versus actually the necessity and their weakness, their like blind spot seems to be actually acknowledging and seeing like Black folk and their capacity, but also making sense of what Black gods mean to them, and to be able to not just dismiss that as some kind of like, because you actually inspired me to reread Fawcett and actually see what he was trying to do, and realize like how, you know, he was specifically trying to speak to Philadelphia and also the Great Migration and also the 1930s, but how we're taking it, I think, into a different, because we're combining of Du Bois, we're also thinking about it in this time. And like, it's also, and how I think back in Fawcett's time, he spent a lot of time, I think, having to say, how he had to actually engage in all of this debate about like how much of Black religion is just like an African survival or retention, where like there were a lot of white anthropologists that wanted to like paint this vast kaleidoscope of religious thought and ingenuity, and even the creation of like these new kinds of religions, like even something like the Church of God by Prophet Cherry, or the Moorish Science Temple, as like just a predisposition to religion. Like Black people are always just predisposed to religion, almost like this primitive or pre-modern thing. But actually, he was trying to find the language. I don't know if he says it himself directly, and perhaps that's one of the things that we get to do by taking his work forward, or like synthesizing of Du Bois, is to say like, no, there's actually something really modern about it. And like when you said, Joe, earlier, like sports is one of the few areas that like Black folk have been allowed to express themselves. Actually, I think one of the big things that like Fawcett says is that when the Negro came to the cities of like North of Philadelphia and to Chicago, New York, actually one of the only areas they could actually express themselves and create some semblance of like a different like political, economic, like actually even underlying the economic functions, and but all the social functions of these churches is actually a way to express themselves when they've been so shut off from all the other ways that they can participate in like northern urban life, which I think is something like Fawcett was like trying to say and also establish, while also like trying to point out why then exactly is like Father Divine so interested in like the like feeding the people, and then also like that like what is it, the United House of Prayer is so interested in trying to sell like soap and stationery and to try to create an alternative economy, but also a way of actually creating a different kind of social system. And like he also says that it's most people seem to join these churches having spent time in other kinds of denominations, other mainstream denominations, by saying they wanted to get close to God. Like somebody who's spoken, who God came to them, or to find something. And I feel like that what we're able to, I think, articulate, what I find so helpful is when you just even bring back up this idea that like Black gods represent a search for truth, beauty, and freedom, because I think it like helps to continue anchoring ourselves in that, because I think that's something that we're, I think, uniquely trying to work out and trying to uniquely, I guess, define in this iteration of our study for this time. And I think something that you also, that just really struck me also from your talk on Tuesday, that I think is worth maybe thinking more about, and I was trying to make sense of as well, as how today Black gods are crying out to be heard under the weight of so much suffering, and how Black folk uniquely are caught in so many so much of the fallout of this crisis for the past few decades of deindustrialization, but also what you brought up with the introduction of something even like a prosperity gospel that has like torn apart or even like eroded the foundations of these churches, but also the entry of like politicians into Black churches. It's actually something it seemed that Fawcett turned out, he like the later he studied this in the later stages of his life, the more he didn't like that politicians actually operated in churches, where the church's doors were open to politicians. But it's a lot about what we're also saying about how, that as we talk about Black gods today, I mean, I'm having a lot of questions too about like, how are they continued to be worshipped among the people? If, say, like, they are crying out to be heard, maybe they are always found in churches, maybe like young people, or like many Black folk have had to leave churches because it no longer, maybe those churches no longer, serve as places where Black gods are even honored or made sacred. I mean, these are just questions I feel like we all have. And like, maybe there is something what you're saying about the second, or like a different aspect of Black gods, which is also to be found in the art and the music and the search for divinity from the part of Black artists or Black dancers and musicians that might have more to speak to, or maybe contain that kernel today that might continue to speak to our moment. But these are all questions I feel like your talk more so, I guess, opened up that I'm excited to talk through in our Lucien Blackwell reading group, which will continue on with the reading of Dark Water. And I was thinking a lot about like the fact that not only does this book have a lot of fiction and poetry, that when Jeremiah Shimbarta and I like need to talk about what it's like to facilitate this going forward, we're also really excited about chapters like Immortal Child, but also the damnation of woman, like even the like mother ideal or the role of woman, and like how that might also help us shed light on Black gods. But I was also for like the chapter of beauty and death, like a chapter titled about like beauty. But when you talked about earlier, and I'm just like weaving threads together in a way I'm not so sure it's very systematic, but I realized like when you were talking about like even this idea of like how much like Western civilization or white supremacy has had a privilege upon like purity and like protecting like like whiteness. Like I was thinking a lot about the souls of white folk.
Physical whiteness.
Oh wait,
I'm sorry.
like the
Yeah.
souls of whiteness, like Du Bois himself delving into the social psychology, but in the depths of like the crisis that emerged after even World War One, and even then he was starting to declare that there's a Europe that has all of its focus upon like progress has come to an end almost like already before even in the world of Africa, saying that there's something of a like European, like there's a collapse like impending for Western civilization. So I mean, these are all things I feel like I'm just really trying to be open about all the questions I have in this moment. And I just want to like not lose the sense also what you're saying about like this moment and how, and like, what you were saying about the regime facing greater and greater existential crises, and this idea of like civil war, revolutionary, that helps a lot of revolution, but also the ruin of all classes and what we've been doing to understand like the irreversibility of this crisis.
The irreversible. Go ahead, Fatih.
Oh, yeah, actually, I thought about whenever I come to these seminars, I look for the common denominator as opposed to my own personal story, the tendency, what happened to me. But when you have people from different backgrounds, it helps when you can go for the broad. And I want to address the issue of what the doctor said about after World War II, Euro-America culture was kind of all washed up, basically. I want to address that. And then I find that when you, and also I want to, the issue of performance practices versus the script. Because see, what I hear all of you say, and even when Jeremiah talked about the images in the ceiling, what we're talking about when you orient people and you're not depending solely on script, then you get visual representation, like those liturgical dramas from the early years. What the function of the liturgical drama, you can see the enactment of the nativity, and then you see the images, and it's a way of, it's a form of literacy or proficiency for the so-called classes that were isolated from literacy. Now, getting into the arts, what I noticed that when I first studied musicology, then I moved to ethnomusicology. Musicology was focusing on, I'll call it the cult of the individual. You talk about Wagner. Okay, the implication is, we Germans are like Wagner. When you look at the percentage of people in Europe at the time he composed, that composed like him, most of them don't folk music. And then I noticed the methodology with the Europeans. You select certain achievers from different European countries and you develop a historiography. And you imply to the world that this is the roots. Now, what musicology did, particularly after the Second World War, that's when it gave birth to America, a guy named Alan Merriam said, we need to start to focus on what the masses produce. And then say, well, if you want to talk about a German music, or talk about a particular music, get the region, and say, well, what do 98% of the people do? You know, the whole idea came up instead of using folk music, they use traditional music, oral traditions created by the folk, the people. And this applied primarily to Africa he was dealing with. He wasn't dealing with urban cultures that came later. So the point I'm making, and I'm not going to talk a lot about it, but take in mind that I noticed that Europeans are good for inventing things, but I noticed when I look back on how it trickles down to graduate school, undergraduate, K through 12, the invention of culture is via appropriation, selection, and adaptation. So they're good at like setting the situation up where they can act like it happened naturally. Like when you said bringing the Beatles in. Okay, they ran out of gas. They needed some type of inspiration. But because a lot of their so-called progression was developed on people writing things. The Wagner writes out. Chopin, he wrote it. Bach, he wrote a lot of music. But after the Second World War, you talk about technology. More people have access to internet technology, so more people have access to African American culture and Africans through visual and hearing. Sports. If you look at that, like how many people know about these great athletes? Television, technology. Pre-technology, unless you would live here or you went to the theater or you did something, you wouldn't know. So I think we need to take consideration. If you're going to set up a counter-attack, the question is how do you get control of that visual and oral tradition to revise the narrative. That's really what you did, a revision of the narrative. See, a lot of times the narrative is not declared, so we think, like they say, okay, you come to America, nobody told you that it behooves you to just preoccupy yourself with becoming white. They don't say it, but because of the visual and then with technology, you think you turn on TV, oh, everybody's white and nice. Yeah, exactly. So I'm just saying, regardless of your background, if you're going to contribute to the revision of this narrative history, because they're notorious, I noticed, historiography. And then you have music historiography. You know what they did? They said, oh, Western music started in Egypt, one paragraph or two lines. Oh, then it went through Greece, and then it slipped through Europe by way of the medieval period. Then you get these individual cultural identities, post-Catholic Church. So the way they did it, if you looked at the map, they went Egypt, Greece. So you stop thinking about development in Egypt because you went over here. So they're moving linear, but they're also moving geographically at the same time. So when you look at if you look at the timeline of music history, Baroque, Romantic, Classical, you see it's going from one country to the other. Baroque, you hear Bach a lot. Classical, you hear Beethoven. Then you have Mozart, but in Vienna, not in Germany, in Vienna. Then Chopin, you say, well, he's from Poland, but why is everything written in French? So this line, which is going linear and chronological, but it's also geographical. And when I finally said, I said, what happened? The percentage of people that played Chopin waltzes during the time of Chopin, it was only the people he had access to in the parlors, in the salons, not in the street, not in the field. Now when it comes to African and African American culture, I think it's so one person is powerful, one art, but when you get a total community on the same page, it overwhelms the Euro-Americans to the point that they just say the hell with it. I'll just be like Eminem, let me just learn rap song. Get a suntan and sing a rap song. Because some of them just give up. Yeah. Wow. So, but oral versus the power of oral tradition versus written. That's the point. And vision.
Yeah, I wanted to add in that, like what you were saying, I mean, like talk when you brought on the example of, Herbert Spencer and so on. I mean, what you're saying is, I think it's about musicology. This really seemed to me to, reflect this idea of, social science, which comes from Europe, where the idea is never to actually find out what the world is like, but you do have a vision, and the vision is, the vision is empire. All of this starts from a period of like when white supremacy has started as its quest of the world and colonialism and so on. That even like thinkers, like even the natural scientists at this time forward goes into this kind of thinking where the way to understand the world is basically to what you were saying, like cherry pick examples which you're going to then use to define what a people looks like without ever having to study people. And I think this is, I think this is really deep because I don't think nobody has really got to the essence of this question the way that Du Bois manages to get it to. Because what he's saying is that I'm not even simply going to talk about the fact that this historiography is wrong, but that this is a philosophy that is not worthy of the human being. And there is a different way of looking at the world, which is perhaps most concrete, which comes out most concretely in the Black struggle, precisely because Black folk in America never had these standards, these false standards, which I think today, today these white standards are precisely what is holding white people back from joining world humanity. And I was going to say this because I think I was going back to what what Kathy brought up and also what you were saying before about why are we even talking about Black gods now? Because I think at this time when we are nearing from what from your initial remarks about the fact that we are approaching an irreversible stage of collapse, that the question is where do we go from this chaos? And I think what we are trying to contend in free school is that Black, we're trying to turn towards Black gods as something that unifies the American people at this time. And this is, it's I was thinking about also your talk because you did say this thing about how Black gods are inclusive, to be contrasted with white gods. And the example you brought in today about witch hunts, I think we sort of it made me think that it is, I think, probably white Christianity as it develops over, I don't know how far back to go, but probably to the Holy Roman Empire or something. There is this constant striving for this kind of purity in, because it reflects it, gods as a reflection of human beings, and therefore white God as a reflection of white people's image of themselves, which is this idea of purity and so on. And I was saying this because this idea of a pure white God, which leads to the medieval phenomena of witch hunt. Not even medieval. It carried on in different forms today. McCarthyism was also a form of witch hunt, and carries on to the modern world. And then at the same time, the fact that Black God, what Kathy brought up as Black God being a form of a modern God, I think that's something to, because I think it is undeniable that every civilization, the marker for every civilization, one of the markers is this idea of a myth or gods, or we can say religion, but I think it's more than religion, but it's about the set of ideals and stories that the people look up to as having defined them. And you call it myth or gods and so on. But then the idea of Black gods in America is not simply the transfer of African gods to America, because something new had to be done. This is the time when we talk of this period in free school as the advent of modernity, where the world is rapidly industrializing and also like modernity in the sense that human beings are are striving to become fully human through the political struggles of freedom. And the thing that really came out of your talk the other day was, black gods as almost as a weapon for fighting for freedom. I think this essentially this made me think of what Kat was also saying, that black gods as a modern idea of God, where we're not talking about gods of the old world, which could allow you, which could afford you a way to retreat from the world into your own, this is like this idea of a path with Hinduism, something that you were talking about. Like it could allow you, like religion in the old world allows you to retreat into your own, retreat from the world and seek for freedom in the next life and so on and so forth. But Black God does not allow you to do that. It's talking about the way we talk about Black gods, even the way that Fawcett goes into all of these institutions that Black folk from the South come up with the moment they get here, is that these have been the grounds on which the struggle for freedom has been fought. And I think today, especially when when you talk about how are we to move forward from this period of chaos, complete chaos, or the ruling class does not have a program which even it can even try to enforce. It has given up, it has thrown in the towel, and in this chaos, which way are we to go? I think it's a bold contention for us to make that yes, we are trying to say that Black God is something we need to take up. Like we as even the American people have to take up just to know where we stand as we in these times ahead, where nothing is certain. We are what you said. It's like revolutionary times or the ruin of all classes or civil war or another world war. None of these are off the table, and a lot rests on at this time. And I'm just saying this because I think the idea of Black gods also crystallizing more for me in recent days after your talk, that we are talking about where we as a people can stand as we search for new ways, in search of a new thinking about the world, even a new thinking about the crisis. And the other thing I wanted to say related to this was the thing you brought up about immigrants, because on the one hand, yes, on the one hand, this issue is used to like immigrants coming into this country to become white, and you don't see and you make no effort to know or see Black people and what this does to this country. But at the same time, these immigrants are the ones who inform the rest of the world about this country and about Black. And what we're also trying to see is that it's even the immigrants today from Latin America and Asia and Africa and all over the world who really who have become a tool almost for whiteness, as whiteness more and more diversifies its colors. Yes. But it carries on the same system because its idea of Black folk is essentially unchanged. It's unchanged from from the white supremacist program, and I think it's something deep that the Black gods have been like when you said that the Black gods have been inclusive, they have been inclusive really to the world. Where even Thurman going to India, talking about Black Christianity is something where he is talking about it also in the sense that, okay, this is something which can understand even the Indian people, even the colonized Indian people. And I think it's really deep to say that Black gods is an inclusive idea of God. It sounds one of those things which seems obvious, but I don't think it is. I think it's deep.
If you say Black guy in any year, I was talking about Yaku, and I'm not gonna go into no stress about this, but nobody we all talking about different things.
Right.
We talking about different things. But if you brought that out, like what you say, if you brought that out in front of numerous communities, they were like, "What are you talking about, Yaku?" but not limit. But for me, I'm not going to limit Black heroic figures in our history. And sometimes we may invoke them by their name, you call, like how you think about them and the things they fought for, and some instance, you could walk around, I might walk around with friends of mine, we might think we was all invincible, but we still had other qualities that we was developing. You know what I mean? So when you say Black guys, I don't read about every kind of guy that didn't do in anybody's land, whoever you talk about. I need to go and say like that because everybody in the Hawaiian Islands, all the Oceania, all the people that we don't even hardly discuss, they're always connected to Black families. They look like Black families sitting on Columbia Avenue on the bench, get ready to go to church. In Polynesian countries, all the Polynesian Black families. And all these things I document them like, I want to know how y'all sit. For me, I would study how they sit. I want to know, I do these, what they call like cultural traces. I used to do all the kids in West Atlanta. They all had different, I designed their faces. You would put this Maori or any Aboriginal. They don't scarification, but I use it like PennDOT. I had their face, the kids walking around like, oh my God. But to re-identify ourselves socially, but with the power of your ancestors, the power of, I'll just use the word family. And Tony reminded me, like, I met his dad. I'm humble inside for my lifeline to be with somebody that I can meet, and I'm with his son. But the power to sit with him, because I learned about sitting with all my older relatives and old heads, period, all across Philadelphia. But it's a certain kind of attitude, and the energy of the attitude is more informative. It's like a jazz player playing his horn. He got a young boy that want to play, and you inform him with the keyboard, and he got the note. You got that note just like that, just because we can inform each other like that. Without the computer, we kind of generate the computer polymath of anybody that got to give information across the table. And we ain't got no phone, we ain't have all that stuff, but we had the sophistication of like how we sat, well, how we walked, how we greeted people. Everything we had the impact of the whole community, not the one little 5 village or 5 block. We talk about the radius of Philadelphia, and we're inside Pennsylvania. Anybody want to come to Philadelphia, they know when they got to Philadelphia, they probably thought they was in New York, because Black people carry the information of how people walk, stroll, hop, play rope, shoot dice, and play marbles. I used to make contraptions when I was a little kid. It's all these little things of like the future of invention and being the future of the inventors. Like we ain't have to have nobody, not say we ain't gonna have no book. We'll make a damn book because we invent things at the moment that we need it. It's like the greatest need, and it's invented. Nobody talk about baking no cake. We bake cakes around the clock without nobody talk about how we did already done. You want to slice? You know what I mean? Because we if you say Black guys, it's something that's secretive in the ingredients of our lives. Yes. Secretive ingredients of our life. If I was boxing, maybe Tony, something that we had that other people, if they catch it, they're gonna catch it butt whooping. Because our people had to grow in neighborhoods where we was all neighborhoods across the whole city. I used to be in Frankfurt. We're gonna just get the car and ride over here to one of my relatives that live over in Frankfurt. We wasn't limited about, not having everything. We went where we went when we got everybody with us and we could move like that. But that's information. Our information is what these people in this country, they don't appreciate how we preserve all these things.
Power.
And just hearing him play the piano, how diligent that is. Just the life of having diligence, being able to give. He's sitting there giving us the details of this remarkable piano. That's why all Black things like pianos is. It's just something that's part of how we are. And I love it.
Symbol of achievement, sort of.
You know, nobody can do. You can be in our interest. You cannot steal something that's a part of our lives. You cannot. You can go ahead. You gonna come back because you can't run. You can't outrun none of us to say I'm still right. Because my mother taught me. My mother and dad taught me when I was like 3 and 4 and 5 years old. I wasn't like later on talking. I was already talking to shoot on the block that I live. I go in that block and talk to everybody down the damn block. So they'd be like, hey, you know, like that. But our imagery of who we are, like Reverend Leon Sullivan, I know you was because I was with him too. I went to YC. He took me home in a limousine. But he said, oh, this kid, we could just call me that. But we grew up with courage, but we could still have the fear of the Lord.
But still have what?
We grew up with courage, but we still had the fear of the Lord.
Yeah. But go ahead, Alice. And
No,
then-
I mean, I think listening to Derek is always so interesting because, and it's actually helping me to concretize some of what I'm thinking, because sometimes I think it takes a moment for me to understand what Black folk are saying and where they're coming from and the history that not all, but some share, a good amount share. I feel like oftentimes what's different is that I think Black folk carry both a spirit of resistance, but also creation and invention. I think that's what you're trying to say.
At the same time.
But because I think it's different, or what I'm trying to say is actually back to what Doc, you were saying. I think it was really important that you started your introduction with American Empire, because you can't have a conversation about Black gods and Black ideals without talking about American Empire. Because when we're talking about Black gods, we're talking about people not just striving for beauty and freedom, but also a people that are fighting a system. It's not a pacifist path. And I think the reason why I say that is because, like, what do we mean by white standards and a white system? Where, like, this conversation actually helps me to make sense of my upbringing, actually, which is quite informative, because from 1st to 8th grade, I went to Italian Roman Catholic Church for school. All the teachers were Italian Catholics, and all the students were Chinese in Chinatown of New York City. And I think I don't think about that period of my life because I'm like, oh, okay, whatever. I'm not religious. The thing I took away from it is just to be a good human being, meaning thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, that sort of thing. But I actually think it was this is the first time in a while that I reflected on that, where in the church, when we would go to Mass, we were looking at a physically white God, but not only a physically white God. I think it instilled, well, the God that was taught, and then also the ways the teachers treated us. They didn't treat us outrightly horribly, but I think there was always this sense that I had felt, which is that they were kind of patronizing, which is that these Chinese kids need to be civilized. And I think what I felt was that, if we were rambunctious, it was because we weren't white, or we needed to be disciplined. And that what we should strive for was to become white. And so, but then what is the kind of human being or adult that such an education teaches? I think people ask, you always ask me, like, why are you always so quiet? And I remember, like, when I was younger, I was actually not that quiet. Like, I jumped around, I talked a lot, all that stuff. But then through that education, I think I was taught to behave in a certain way.
It's melancholy. It's melancholy. It's melancholy, but it's you.
Yeah, and so, but then it essentially raised me to become adjusted to the society, rather than King and the civil rights movement, where you are disciplined, you are kind, but it also raised a level of resistance to society. And I don't think that was an education that I had received. And so when we talk about white gods, it is in relation to the society, to the injustices of the society, but also of American empire. I think the other thing is that for those of us, you've also asked this question, why is it that some of us go to, like the first time going to the Nation of Islam or going to one of these Black churches, I think people have some sort of breakdown or catharsis in preschool. Because for the first time, I remember going to the Nation of Islam and I got very emotional because it was one of the first times I had gone to a religious institution where you weren't being talked down to. It wasn't that you have to be this way or that way, but that you are beautiful and you have you come from a civilization and a people. And then the other part, I think this is just a side note, but it is true, which is that a lot of like what comes out of the New York Times or the articles, it's very white centric. And even a concrete version of this is that in one of the descriptions of the talks between Trump and Putin that are upcoming or supposed to be upcoming, they say that Putin has been isolated from the rest of the world. And so what do you mean when you say rest of the world? And their chief example is NATO. And so they're like, Putin, like everyone's ostracized Putin. But what they're not saying is that everyone white has ostracized Putin. Everyone in NATO has ostracized Putin. But what about the rest of humanity that actually constitute the majority of humanity? What are they thinking, and what are their attitudes towards Putin or Russia or China or whatever it is? But yeah, it just took me by surprise because I was like, you say everyone has ostracized him, and then you just cite NATO, which is just Europe. But
Are you finished?
yeah.
Yeah, I just want to add to it because this was also very similar to what I was saying, especially when you said that thing about the tariffs being about get down or lay down. The world is like, no, I don't have to do either. This is not the 1940s. It's 2025, and the world has changed. But what Alice was saying also reminded me about, and Kathy brought this up, this thing of white unity, and this like almost being repulsed by the thought that the white lineage could be sullied by intermixing with Black people and so on. But I mean, I think there's that, and we're talking about genetic purity there. But then I feel like hand in hand with that also came ideological isolation for the white completely. Like when you have all these like almost mind-boggling examples of Thurman going to India or Kingston to India or Gandhi being able to see the Black struggle. And I'm only talking about India and Afro-America because I think about these a lot. But then you have examples like this. I mean, even, the exhibition on African leaders that Raja and Nandita talked about maybe a couple of preschools back. This idea that there was one struggle and it was against white standards. It was against a white world order. It was against imperialism and war. It just shows you how pathological the white world, white civilization became over time because of this idea that we have everything to teach the world and nothing to learn. So while they did not let their genetic lineages be basically sullied by other races, they also did not allow their ideology and worldview to get something. And I think this is also why the way you frame it, like the consciousness, has been very clarifying for me, because at first my mind went to Hegel, like, oh, are you talking about? But then I think when you bring it to Du Bois, it becomes the most concrete it can be, because he's saying, like, okay, even if Du Bois, me talking about my life is not because I am something, but because my life as a Black man lived in this like very significant period of time from the 1860s to the 1960s represents something about human consciousness and the Black consciousness in particular. And this is valuable because it has something to contribute universally to human consciousness. And you don't see it that way. You do not see the achievements of Black people in terms of where their consciousness went through the struggle, the freedom struggle, but also this cultural renaissance, the music and art and everything that we've been talking. You don't see, like we talk about it that way, that this is a contribution and an inheritance for the whole world, but the white world does not see it that way. And so I completely agree with what you were saying, that the crisis is self-made for white people, but then there has also existed a way out, that because of your civilizational allegiances to whiteness, you have never allowed yourself. And I think the time is coming closer and closer every day now to either make that choice or just basically perish, like Baldwin puts it. And I mean, I was saying this to Doc today morning, that sometimes it boggles my mind, because off the top of my head, I can name 50 people, 50 Black Americans who like basically had these stellar achievements in terms of, just everything, science, music, art, literature, whatever you can come up with that human beings can do. And yet the prevailing notion of Black people all across the world is that of criminality, is that of some kind of, backwardness or something, and how is that possible? It does not make sense, and nobody can make it make sense for me. It's just, and what I wanted to say is that if you think about, because it took me a long time to fully understand like the essence of your lecture on Tuesday, because I think this idea of looking at the history of human consciousness, rather than the history of oppression, for instance, which you can do, and you can like lay out the facts and the chronologies of how, when, what happened, and then what followed, etc. But then to see how human beings responded to it, and especially how Black people responded to their oppression to make something completely new, that was very clarifying. Because from that lens, if you look at the idea of Black gods, I mean, I agree with what everybody has said. Basically, it's to say that there is freedom possible now. In this lifetime, salvation is possible, and it will come through human hands. It won't come through divine intervention. And that's why all Black gods are men. They're human beings. And then with music, also this reach for a new standard of beauty and love and truth, which, I think, at least I used to be predisposed to think of art and music and so on to be like supplements to life. But when you get when you get to basically the Black consciousness, you find that no, it's not a supplement to life, it's life itself. This is why Baldwin will say something like, music is life. What music is deriving from, life is also deriving from. And I feel like maybe it's a simple thing to say, but it was clarifying to me to see it all from that idea that what you're trying to gauge is not just the history of Black people, but the history of Black consciousness, and especially the Black proletarian consciousness. And yeah, I mean, just a few other things is, I agree with Alice. What she started with is that the way you started with the American state and basically what the price of empire, the kind of irreversible crisis that imposed on white people, that's very important. Because I mean, yeah, whenever they're trying to assess where a country is at, like what stage of progress, what stage of crisis, the economics becomes so much an important factor. So you talk about GDP, people, all of these things. But then very rarely do you deal with the questions of what is the state for? Like, what is the state for? Is it not for giving every citizen that state is responsible for a certain standard of life, a certain purpose for life? And this is why, like I agree, David Brooks might be one of those commentators who come at least close to dealing with these questions, because there was this recent article where he was talking about how everywhere in the world you look, there's an upward surge, there's optimism about the future, but the richest nations, which are the white nations, it's going downhill, where most people feel like their parents were better off than they were, and their children are going to be worse off than they were. And there's no purpose, there's no spiritual resources for the country to basically imagine even what the future will look like. And all of this goes on to explain more clearly why in free school we talk about things like black gods, or why we talk about things from a civilizational perspective. Because, yeah, I mean, that contradiction, and Baldwin talks about the contradiction between what the state is and what it should be for, is just not something that anybody ever deals with. And then also the glaring absence of the black struggle from any analysis of this crisis. Nobody, I have not read a single commentary about the political crisis in America today, which actually gives 2 sentences worth of importance to what that the civil rights movement and the ensuing struggle in all fronts of human thought and consciousness, what that, how that like relates to this crisis.
We all grew up with a number of writers. It became let her finish.
No. I have a few other things from the lecture, but wait, I need to find my thought back. No, I think I'll stop there. I'll come back.
Go, let Britta.
You know, as an African American, as a black person, grew up in North Philadelphia, moved from North Philadelphia to West Philadelphia, lived in Trevor Town, lived in various parts of Philadelphia. The church was central to my race. And one of the things, I walked away from the faith, had no intentions of ever going back. And what I realized is that white people read about Christianity, but they were incapable of ever becoming Christian as a civilizational state. And it wasn't until I read the Bible and I composed my mind into iconography, into pictures. And it came about because someone very close to me went to prison. And when he came out with scriptures. And one day I was sitting by myself, an inner voice, divine voice spoke to me and said, why don't you stop looking at the pictures and pick up the Bible? It's your history. So I went on an intellectual tour of the scriptures. I started with the Old Testament. Every country in the Old Testament is in Africa or the Middle East. You're no Europeans until the New Testament. So when I looked at the Old Testament, Libya, Ethiopia, Somalia, Eritrea, Egypt, and even Palestine. Palestine is part of Egypt, the Egyptian Empire. So with the white folks, I'm looking at the pictures, this is not matching up. And so on this search, I realized he could never be Christian because civilization is in opposition to the teachings of Christ. He doesn't have the capacity to become a Christian because Christianity was based on a theocracy that he's supposed to, which is love thy neighbor as thyself. And all this stand on the gospel. And Christ made it very clear, who's your neighbor? That's everybody that looks like you. Everybody that bears the image of man is your brother. And you're supposed to afford to them the same thing you would afford yourself. Would you steal? Would you want somebody to steal from you? Then why do you steal? You want somebody to rape your wife? Then why do you rape his wife? Do you want somebody to put you in slavery? Because the gospel says that man is called manslave. Slavery is in opposition to the gospel. So he had to create a whole canon, a whole theocracy that was not Christianity. It was Imperial Christianity. I call it colonial Christianity. It has nothing to do with the Bible. Absolutely nothing. And so when I read the scriptures, I fell in love with the God that was in that Bible because he made it human. And that's how a slave can fall in love with Jesus and the master. He was incapable of falling in love with Jesus. Because as a slave, I had to bear the brutality of humanity and still love you because he bore the image of God, he was denied God by the way he treated. You understand what I'm saying? So I don't call myself a Christian because Christianity has been brutalized and raped and tortured. It's what I call colonial Christianity, Imperial Christianity. Has nothing to do with the Bible. They have never been Christian. They're incapable of Christian, for being Christian. From the French to the British to the Germans. Look at Germany. Germany was such a pivot point of Protestantism under Luther. And look what it produced, Adolf Hitler. Why? Because they never became Christian. They can read about Christianity, but can they practice it? They cannot practice it because the sexuality of their total existence is exploitation and theft and evil. That's why David Brooks said that they don't know what to do with the future because there's nothing left to steal. And you can't steal what's left. The Indians said you can't steal what's left. Chinaman, you can't steal Chinaman. You can't steal what's left. 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 So you're happy because I can't steal no more. I can't work. I can't do it. So why would I get it? And I can't do it anymore. So that's what it would be transhuman. Oh, yep. Oh, sorry. With the revolution, we're not talking about this.
I just wanted to add to what people are saying, because I've been thinking about this question of if white Christianity is failing as kind of the centerpiece of white civilization, then where are white people going? And this may sound kind of odd, I guess. It was kind of, I hope it doesn't sound like too flippant, but like, to be honest, as I'm reflecting on also just like our generation and like what I was raised into and the people that I know, the kind of social life that I know, and maybe it's similar to Alex, but honestly, as I was trying to grapple with like, okay, like all of these young people are leaving the church, where are they going to? And to be honest, like you're saying, Joe, like all of these Americans who are like in their 20s, 30s, 40s, they have nothing to live for. Like to be like totally honest, they have nothing to live for. And literally, like I think especially for young men, and I'll say especially young white men, but not just young white men, like I was trying to like come up with answers like what if they replace God with? And like for some of them, it's like literally like Marvel movies. Like I'm not even joking. It's like you would not believe how, and like I'm saying this because I'm also susceptible to it in a way, which is like you would not believe how important it is for like white men for like Marvel movies to be good, for Marvel movies to do well. And it's not just about the Marvel movie, but it's like literally like because you don't believe in, you don't go to church anymore. It's like what has become your religion. It's like literally pop culture. And it's like, yeah, like again, like these godlike figures who then become the kind of replacement for your religion. But like, I just wanted to bring it up because it's like, it's a sign of how much this quote unquote religion, like you're saying, has failed because it doesn't actually have a solid foundation, a real spiritual foundation. And it's like, in the absence of that, all you can do is basically run to like, oh, I hope the next Marvel movie is good. Because you're literally living your life without anything to live for. And so in the absence of that, you need to like have at least something to give you feedback of like, oh, like the next Marvel movie is going to be good. The next like DC superhero movie is going to be good. Or like whatever you can replace with other things. So I want to bring that up, I guess, is like also like what, like in the, not just at the level of the elite, but also just like ordinary people. What have you replaced God with? Your white God. And I don't know, I was just thinking about it because I'm into pop culture and stuff. But the other thing I want to say is also on this question of like, why are we talking about gods, plural, right now? And it's because I was thinking about it, actually like the other reason, it's not just even within the United States, but also globally, is like, yeah, the situation in Gaza. And like, you know, this big question that a lot of commentators have been asking, which is, why don't the Palestinians in Gaza just leave? Why do they stay there? And this is the thing, which is it cannot be purely explained by all of the kind of formulas and theories that people have around whether it's like class struggle, whether it's whatever. And to be honest, like, and this is also actually gets to something that Fatih said earlier, which is like, to me, one of the ways that you can see the Black freedom movement alive in the world today and the kind of what the Black freedom movement was able to innovate also in terms of political and revolutionary struggle is that, like, to me, the clearest living indication or kind of manifestation of something like nonviolence is the fact that like the civil rights movement was probably the first revolutionary movement in history, which did use essentially this new technology of television and of the media in a very strategic way. And like, actually, I see a lot of the resonance of that in what's happening in Gaza, and the fact that it's like you, especially for young people, and I think it's hard to kind of convey this, but like, especially for young people, it's like you open, like the first thing that I do when I wake up is like I open my phone, right? And I don't know how it is for other people, but it's like you open like Instagram, and like suddenly, like immediately you're hit with like images of like starving children, and children who have been brutalized and bombed by the Israelis. And it's like that, those images have been basically showered, like peppering our consciousness for the past 2 years. But the other part, it's not just the brutality of it, but it's also like however limited it is through social media, and however much social media can also manipulate people, I think what has also happened is like, I know this is for me, it's like when you're always seeing these images of like, okay, why are these people staying? Why are they continuing to resist? And why are they not giving in to essentially this genocidal agenda of the Israeli, not just the Israeli government, but Israeli society, which wants to just remove them, depopulate the entire Gaza Strip so that they can set up resorts there, whatever. It's because it's like they believe in a God. And it's because like, and like, it's funny because yeah, I was raised Christian, and now we've become more interested in Islam through the Nation of Islam. But it's like also, yeah, just like the basic video, like, I don't know, all these like videos of like children, young people, old people who, whenever it's like, yeah, like one of their brothers is martyred, for example. It's like I think it's like the dua or the prayer, which is like, Allah is sufficient for us and is the best disposer of our affairs. It's like, I don't like that. I think to me is, especially in the world stage, is like the crystallization of like, yeah, this idea of God matters, and it is part of what drives world history forward also. And it's like there's no way you can understand what's happening with like Israel, Gaza, the struggle that's unfolding, also the way that America is implicated in it, without having a concept of like, what do you call it, religion or of God, because this is also what's driving, at least especially the resistance of the Palestinians, is like their faith in God. And I don't know, I just wanted to bring that up because I think for some people, like, yeah, this whole idea, like, even for me, it's like trying to wrap my head around the idea of black gods. It's like, I think it's going to take some time. But I was also just trying to bring it to like, why does this matter, especially for the world, and to what Alex is saying, especially in the context of the collapse of American empire or the kind of combustion of American empire. So yeah, I just wanted to.
Why did you use the decline and use combustion? Why did you use combustion?
I think because the two options are either like a kind of slow decline, but then it seems like the other, maybe more likely option, I don't know, is like, yeah, world war. If you can't control the world, then you're going to try to blow it up. And in that sense, it's like, I'm not actually sure if, this is the point that you were raising, I'm not sure if the American elite had given up, because it's like, that I think that put kind of maybe doesn't fully take into account how much they want to fight to hold on to what they have. But yeah, and also, well, one thing, this is also about the economic stuff, this is the last thing about that. Like, part of what's really ironic and funny about the whole Trump thing and the tariffs is that the reason why he's doing the tariffs is because he's, like you said, he's dealing with the kind of aftermath of this period of American empire as a unipolar hegemon in the world. But it's like the reason why he's doing the tariffs is because he thinks that, in an ironic and stupid way, that like it's other countries that are the beneficiaries of American empire. That's literally it's like his worldview is that, oh, China has gotten rich off of American empire, Europe has gotten rich off of American empire. And like that's also the reason why whatever he's proposing will never work, is because he literally has a flawed conception of reality. And also, like, all of the projects that are being announced right now, it's like Apple is like, well, we're gonna invest $1 billion. Like all of that is PR basically, and they're just trying to get whatever deal they can get from Trump. But it's like, yeah, like I don't know. I was thinking about it for like I have to do some of this stuff for my work, and I was at one point I was writing about in my work about Intel, and they had announced $28 billion of investment in Ohio, in the kind of deindustrialized part of Ohio, like several years ago, to build a semiconductor plant there. And it's like $28 billion of investment, thousands of jobs, not just directly, but indirectly, which are being promised to the people of this state, which has been ravaged by deindustrialization, and they just canceled it. Yeah, like they canceled it out of the blue because it's like, oh, we don't have, whatever reasons they have, but it's like all of these investment projects that are being announced, none of them I think are actually going to happen because they need to have good PR to basically have a good relationship with Trump. But like the amount of actual capital and planning and time it takes to actually build the kind of projects that would actually reindustrialize America, no one is willing to commit to it. And it would actually take a genuinely actual transformation of society for that kind of industrialization to take place. So I just want to bring that up.
Yeah, just to add to that, I feel like this is something, Doc, you were also saying about how white people basically can't produce any art, any music, nothing these days, because for a nation to produce something, it has to take the human being seriously. Because at the end of the day, whether you talk about economic policies or you go to slightly more like unquantifiable things like art, music, literature, whatever, even theology, it is for man. It always has to be for the human being. And if you do not see the human being, if the human being is not a category in determining what the face of white civilization looks like or should look like, or what the state looks like or should look like, you can't really produce anything. And that's what we're seeing. And I agree with what Joe is saying. Like now that there's also that added component that they can't steal from the world, it basically grinds to a halt because you can't steal, but you can't produce either. And the only people who are producing, the working class, you've decimated.
Yeah.
And tariffs is not going to fix that. So we are really talking about what King was talking about, a radical revolution of values, and a civilizational basis, maybe for the first time for this country to come together, all of the country to come together around a common civilizational basis, that this is what America is going to mean going forward. And yeah, the ruling class is not going to take that line down because the state, American state, as it has existed over the last 80 years or so, has existed for the ruling class. And it hasn't existed for the ordinary people. And there's just one other thing that I remembered from Doc's lecture that I had found very significant, but I haven't fully understood it, is how you made a distinction between the consciousness that came from the South, the migration of Southern workers to the North. I've been trying to make sense of it because I think you even said that I would call them the proletariat.
Yes.
Even though the North was already industrialized and there was a stable working population and even free blacks. But then I found that very interesting, and it would be like, I'd like to hear more about it, but it reminded me of, how somebody like Baldwin, but almost everybody that I can think of who was somebody in the struggle made in one way or the other a pilgrimage to the American South, And I think the way it makes, even Baldwin in Take Me to the Water, where he describes the South, describes white men, but also white women. And he says white women are perhaps the most blighted of human beings that I've ever seen in my lifetime. I think the importance of the South is basically, or maybe this is a very simplistic explanation, but this is all I've come up with, is everything that we're talking about originates in a crisis of white values or white standards, and the most naked, in-your-face manifestation of that could only be found in the American South, where you couldn't have narratives or mythology about what these race relations actually mean, like you could in the North. There you had to call a spade, and you had to look at white supremacy and say, this is white supremacy. And that's why when Baldwin says this thing of, if there is renewal for America, it will come from the American South, I think he was talking about King, and it did, I think, even though it then became like, it's not like it remained in the South, it became universal. And it's only becoming more and more universal because now white people have to deal with that reality. Immigrants have to deal with that reality.
But see, can I just say something about, this is very important what you said, because first of all, I've often said, and I think it is true, that a city like Philadelphia, especially North Philadelphia, is but an extension or even a suburb of South Carolina. So geographically, they're different places, and in terms of the industrialization, but Black people are still Southern, and that's why you get these Black guys. Even you take the Nation of Islam, that is built by, we call them immigrants from the South. And even today, if you read the interview with Mr. Ishmael, he talks about what we call that old time religion, those old time values. He's not talking like T.D. Jakes, a prosperity gospel. He's talking about a freedom gospel. And they remain true to that. So I would say that it's not like Europeans after the defeat of Reconstruction coming to the United States. They are transformed. They're no longer Croatian or Sicilian or Austrian or whatever. They become white. But Black folk stay Black and are still Black. And let me just make this up. The other thing is that as white people, as Europeans became white, they became more passive. And hence, as far as it's kept, they don't know how to fight. They really don't. They know how to be angry, they know how to be upset, especially at Black people. And this is a moral crisis for white people in general, for white working people in particular, who often went to similar jobs, not the same ones as Black people, who see Black people, not so much in a distance, but you see them walking down the street. You see them, but yet you still refuse to see them. And one of the great disabilities of the American white population is their almost pathological refusal to learn anything from Black people. Why not? Why don't you want to learn from these people who have done all of this? Why do you always want to deny what they have achieved? And that's across the board. You know what I'm saying? I say, yes, there are those who don't, but the majority, the vast majority. And we kind of see it in their day-to-day lives, which is not really studied by sociology that much, although the Black life world is deeply studied. So white people are a passive group. And that passivity is almost a reflection of a contempt for Black people. If you march and struggle, I'm going to do the opposite. I'm not going to march and struggle for anything. If you want universal health care or jobs for all or whatever you want, I want the opposite because I'm white and I can't agree with you all. So they come to the table at this point hugely disabled. And Black folk are miles ahead of them in our understanding of possibility. They have shut down. And that's why David Brooks probably among all of the commentators is coming to truths that most of them don't want to face. That for white America, it looks like it's over. That white America cannot do anything. You know, it's over. And like you say, you know, we've gone to so many churches. We went to the Garden of Prayer, and the Garden of Prayer is a poor congregation, but they create a palace of prayer. You know, poor people. The Nation of Islam isn't wealthy, but they create this palace because their gods live and they honor their gods. You go to a white church, a white denomination, the Episcopals have some of the most beautiful churches in the world, and nobody is there. The Catholic Cathedral, St. Peter's and Paul, one of the most beautiful places in the world, certainly in the city, but nobody's there, you know? And so it is their passivity. But I'll end on this, forgive me for talking to you, but it reflects the fact that they gave up at least on what Karl Marx proposed, and that is a class conflict. That the workers should unite to fight for their rights. They abandoned it because to fight for rights might trickle down to black people. Honestly, you think I'm making this up? Any black person will tell you almost, wouldn't you say the same? That they will not fight even for their best interest because black people might get something out of it. That's a pathology. And that's why the black gods are inclusive. That's why it is not a small matter that the Nation of Islam says we are Asiatic black men. Now, why would you go to Asia? Because we are not only this. And I just want to say one other thing. You see, we talk about chronologies and time. What does it mean if built into a theology is the notion of timelessness? That infinity is a fundamental tenet, a ground of their theology. That black men and women are divine and infinite. The white world always must have a beginning and end. And the end, they're looking at. They're looking at the end. But black folk don't look at it that way. I look at listen to black music, I look at black college marching bands, which I highly enjoy. They're acting like there's a celebration, there's a future. There is a future. And the way they play the music, the enthusiasm, the way they march, you know, and these are young kids, man. And you're right. A white person, a white band, in 1,000 years could never march that way. The drum line would never sound that way. And you have to ask, what does all of this say civilizationally, philosophically? And why then, I would say this, black folk are the only vanguard the American people have. It's not going to come from anywhere else. And message of this Vanguard is that there is a way out. The message of the white man is we've come to the end. Yes, I'm sorry, Chair.
He came to the end because, I'm gonna say it again because I've read the Bible, I've read it extensively for years. He never became a Christian.
Who's that?
Europeans, white people never became Christians. Never. From a civilizational societal perspective, they never became Christians. You couldn't have colonized India for 300 years to be a Christian. You couldn't have indulged in the slave trade for several hundred years. You couldn't have done what you did to Native American Indian. Okay? Those theologies cannot exist. Christianity cannot exist with white supremacy. They're oxymorons. They cannot coexist. So he created a theology that's not in that Bible. If you read the Bible and look at the society, the civilization is built, it's totally contrary. I read by Mahatma Gandhi. Mahatma Gandhi has read the Bible studied. He wanted to become a Christian, so he went around white Christians. And they told him to get out of the church, that you can't be here because you don't let them around you. Okay? And it shocked him. It stripped him of everything. The war in Vietnam, I was fortunate when I was at Temple. I was under who he is. I was under him. He read the Bible. He wanted to become a Christian till he met white Christians. Okay? He said, this is not what's in the book. You're supposed to love that man. You're not supposed to steal away the religion. So I need to use the word Christianity because it has a brand. They put a brand in it. And it's not what's in those pages. You read the Bible, what is back in those pages?
It's, it's law. For me, it's the hidden law. It's the law that people break. But for me, inside of the it's the hidden law that you know it reveals itself inside of you. You don't have to worry about it. It's really a self-revelation inside. And for that to have y'all on this stage with the guys, and I'm reiterating, I had to write a letter to you guys about it, but the letter is just not a physical way of reaching the person, okay? I had to write a letter, it had to look exactly like the letter that we sent for his acknowledgement. And some people might make 10, some people might do it 10 times, 20 times. But one that being transmitted that to me, that developed, like my handwriting, the way out, that was my whole feeling. Now, I don't know about how everybody else approaches the Bible because that's how we all hold Bible and the Quran. You might have held the whole Bible in like you can tell for anybody because it's a part of the ministry. It's part of being a minister. You can go on those goals because you're part of that. You're part of the ministry. But I'm sure.
A lot of people work with Leon Sullivan. Leon Sullivan got Martin Luther King introduced what you want to call the society civilization to Christ. They never met Christ. When they met Martin Luther King, they confronted this was not a Christian nation. That's what he confronted them with. You're not a Christian nation. When he confronted them about Vietnam, he confronted them that you're not Christian. Stop. You're not a Christian.
Martin Luther King, not tripping out on this. Martin Luther King, like I read St. Augustine, and if I look at St. Augustine, and wisdom, he mirrors Paul to like your individuality, but we're in the mass.
Say that again.
He might use Martin Luther King. He might say stuff and speak about Paul, but he mirrors Paul's letters back to you, like I wrote Elijah Muhammad the letter. This is it, and so that I can be identified. It's like it gives you a different spiritual dimension. Because we're talking about God or a woman being a goddess, or how we treat Claire Muhammad, or how we respect sisters. The whole aura is absolute respect for. It's like eternal kingship or eternal government it's higher than the one that the presidents might swear, because they might not do nothing to talk about.
But this is, isn't this an interesting
This is
thing?
this would be a theological seminary period. We might do political, but for me, this is a theological seminary. And at other times, because we do science and we stay more on political reality, for the political reality we're discussing. But in some analysis, we are the sociological defining point of the Bois expanding all this sociology, so there's a higher concept for man and woman and for family. And anytime we put his thumbprint on Philadelphia nigga, he was not playing around. He made this city like a brick that you build any building with.
Yeah.
And the people in the community.
Yeah.
Even if it was only 9 blocks or 6 blocks going around, he still made it kind of like a central hub. But
I just want to go back to something that Sambarco said, white gods as gods of an empire. And if the empire crumbles or is in crisis, the gods of that empire crumble. Let us not forget, when the Roman Empire collapsed, they established a new one known as the Holy Roman Empire. Black gods and Black people have never sought empires or imperialism. It's just not in us. I mean,
and going back to the Bible, it's not in the Bible.
no.
That's why I said it. They cannot be Christian. They can't.
Well,
It's impossible.
yes, but see, the other problem is that they cannot be who they have historically constituted themselves as over several centuries. They can't be that. And how do they negate this? What do they do? And they don't. And I think right now it's a moment of decision for them. They can't decide, they won't decide, and they'll try to kick the can down the road. I think on the other side, Black folk have decided. I'm not talking about the Al Sharptons. I'm not talking about the media-invented leaders of Black people. I'm not talking about the politicians or the Blackness leadership fans, because I think there's abundant evidence that their views do not reflect those of the great mass of people. If you have any questions about the Black political class, look at the voter turnout. People don't vote. People don't, But there is, and I think someone mentioned, there's something deeply rooted in the social DNA of Black people that says resist, like one of the great anti-slavery fighters said, let your motto be resist, resist, resist. Let your motto be, let your religion be, let everything you are be resist, resist, resist. And if you study Black folk, just like at the library, I'm giving this talk. I don't know how it's going to go. I don't know how it's going to be received. Well, by the way, I started it with a song by Sweet Honey in the Rock, a song which goes back to the 1830s. We are climbing Jacob's ladder. 4 or 5 years after Nat Turner's uprising to bring down the slave system in Virginia. We are climbing Jacob's ladder. Repurposed for the civil rights movement. Well, how does that happen? This is not just a hymn of the church. This is a song of resistance. Why do we, you cannot escape it. You study or hang out with Black people too long, you see a people always on the throes of a great uprising. Always.
So,
You know, and I think for us, the free school, and our message to the people of Philadelphia and wherever else they listen to us,
mhm,
the first step to renewal,
mhm.
abandon whiteness. White people say, well, I'm physically white. I said, but yeah, you always been physically white, but you've not always had a white identity. That is new to you. And we have to say, give it up. David Brooks, Peter T, all that. Give that up. That is backwardness. That is civilizational backwardness. And it is a form of white suicide, collective death. But black, I mean, I can tell you, when we go to the churches, when we go to Mos Miriam, you know, and we go to churches, and the turnout and population of churches is not what it was. But whenever you go to a church, you more than not see hope and possibility. Whenever you spend too much time around white people, you become depressed. I mean, really. But anyway, it's actually very dangerous to your psychological and physical being to associate with them too much, because they bring, and it's always going to be some dispute about something. Well, what did you mean? Well, do your research. I mean, I can't tell you everything, and then when I tell you, you ain't going to accept it, no way. You know what I'm saying? The universities are a joke, a complete joke. And then I just want to end on one thing, because then we'll go to the chat. But listen, the crisis of the white Jews, which is part of the crisis of Christianity, because of white Christianity. Because, see, Jewish history is not what the Zionists say it is. In Russia, in Western Europe, the Jews made a compromise with the Christian church. And that is why Judeo-Christianity is what we talk about. Not just Christianity. Christianity that fuses Jewish history with the Gospels. And in fact, Jewish history is viewed as the foundation and the entry into the Gospels. In other words, without Judaism, you don't have Christianity. Now, the Zionists, who are neither Jews or Christians, will use anything to justify an imperial project. And so the Jews who adapted to European Christianity during the Middle Ages and the Renaissance today have reconfigured themselves to become that which oppressed them, and in fact carried a genocide out against them. They are the modern day Nazis. We can't get around it. This is what we're looking at. Man. Netanyahu and now Trump, their poodle. I was going to use the B word, which he is. And so it is an unraveling. And, it's no time to mourn for them. Good for them. But we must march forward with our understanding of the people. And And we have this, and Thurman and Gandhi, Du Bois and Mao, Du Bois on that platform with Mao Zedong, Deng Xiaoping, Chopin. What is the message? What is the message? And for Du Bois to say to Africa, learn from China, abandon. So it is. I mean, we don't have to be afraid. We have to be cautious. We have to be present. We have to be in the moment. But don't be afraid, and don't wait for broad popularity in the moment. It will come. It will come. People will know this truth, and it's unavoidable. What the free school has come to is an unavoidable truth. But anyway, go ahead, Terry. Do we have any chats, Nuri?
Yeah, we've got a few comments. Neha, Bambala, Todd, My Manifesto, and Sparks all said good morning. Let's see. Sparks said there's a cultural difference between freedmen, Black Americans, and Black folks from other countries, but we have to realize we have the same story. People like the Gil Scott Heron song "Whitey on the Moon." Miriam said, "On teach that truth. The Black Mother God was depicted all over the earth." And Amla said the missionaries had a job that was paid for by the government. They brought with them some statues, paintings, and crosses. Nathan Reddy says divine intervention via humankind. Much is made of avatars descending into man from heaven, but it's more accurate to say man ascends towards divinity through their own efforts.
That's true.
Laura Creighton says, I think the reason why people don't go to church is because people are not very welcoming when you first go, and you don't have any actual guidance while you're there. And then that's the end of basically the comments.
Can I just say one thing about the trope of the ascending to the concrete or the ascending? I think this is very important because there has to be an ascension. There has to be a purpose for which we ascend, for which we serve, and the ascension to a higher level of consciousness as part of the reconfiguration of the concrete. Because it will be man doing it, and thus it will be consciousness. And therefore, our study of Hegel and Kant.
Maybe we are close to ending this. Bye everybody. We'll see you all next week.